Chapter 26. The drama, full of twists and turns, finally came to an end amidst people's sighs. Chen Zhao and Zhang Lan's family were detained in prison to await trial, while Jiang Wan regained the status of returning to the Jiangfu. Before the court was evacuated, Lian Qiao and Bai Ji could not help but run to her. Both of them were so moved that they could not speak. Lian Qiao said, "This servant knows that Miss is a virtuous person, and that foreign spirit in heaven will bless Mississippi. Later, we must offer some incense to Furen." Jiang Wan shook her head, "Speaking of which, I should thank the two Darren for making the decision for me, as well as Lu Zhu and the others, who were willing to stand up and speak for me. Especially Qiu Yan, I really should thank her." As she finished speaking, she walked to Qiu Yan and smiled, "Thank you, Qiu Yan." Qiu Yan stared blankly at Jiang Wan, a trace of fear in her eyes. In the eyes of outsiders, Jiang Wan had not done anything today, and the ones who had stood up were the few servant girls. In fact, no one knew that everything she had said had been instructed by Jiang Wan. From the beginning, Jiang Wan had laid out such a trap. She had dug a splendidly decorated pit, and smilingly sat to one side as she watched Chen Zhao jump in. Poor Chen Zhao, when he jumped in, thought that the trap he had dug was bigger and bigger. Zhang Lan's family had a deep-rooted position in the rural residence. It could be said that as long as the Jiangfu did not fall, and Xia Yan was still Jiang Quan's wife, they could cover the sky with one hand. Jiang Wan would not be able to topple this entangled power in a short period of time, which was why Zhang Lan was so fearless. He did not expect that Jiang Wan would not even think of cleaning up this complicated relationship. From the very beginning, her purpose was to target Zhang Lan and her son. Her methods were clean, efficient, and decisive. Finally, she would take drastic measures to remove the firewood from under the cauldron. Turning around, she would return to the Jiangfu. No one would be able to do anything to her. But this kind of scheming came from a 10-year-old girl. Moreover, for the past 5 years, Jiang Wan had displayed stupidity and cowardice. This kind of forbearance was truly frightening. Qiu Yan's heart was filled with lingering fear. She did not expect that the person who hid the deepest in this rural residence was this unremarkable eldest Mississippi. If they were to return to the Jiangfu, it was likely that Xia Yan and her daughter would not be able to obtain any benefits. Jiang Wan had endured silently for many years, but now, with such a counterattack, it was likely that the Jiangfu would undergo great changes. Qiu Yan respectfully lowered her head and replied, "Young mistress is the mistress. It is only natural for this servant to do things for the mistress. This servant is very fearful of young mistress' words." Jiang Wan smiled slightly, "Not everyone is like you. In short, thank you very much." She personally held Qiu Yan's hand and felt the other's hand tremble slightly. An inexplicable smile flashed across her eyes. Just as Qiu Yan had thought, she had finally reached the first step. In her previous life, Zhang Lan and her son had played an important role in ruining her life. At that time, she was powerless and could only allow herself to be trampled on. Now, she would not hand over her life with both hands like before. On the contrary, no one could do anything to her. Returning to the Fu was the beginning of her vengeance, but more importantly, after today's great change, Jiang Quan's reputation would inevitably hit rock bottom. If the common people's saliva could cause him to lose face, then the censor's impeachment would definitely cause his official career to be obstructed. Obstructing Jiang Quan's official career was the first thing she wanted to do. The people in the hall dispersed, and Jiang Ruan's gaze fell on the person who was slowly walking towards her. When he came close, she lightly bowed, "Wang Darren." Imperial Censor Wang stroked the white beard on his chin and said meaningfully, "Girl, we meet again." Jiang Wan also smiled faintly and said, "I wonder if Darren's red plum blossoms are currently blooming well. Not self-abased, not fawning, lofty and pure, a lifetime of righteousness, blooming very well." Imperial Censor Wang stared closely at her eyes, just a little stubborn. Jiang Quan smiled lightly, but did not comment. The reason why she was so sure that this Imperial Censor Wang would uphold justice for her was entirely because of the memories from her previous life. In her previous life, when she was in the rural residence, when Bai Ji went out, she heard everyone on the streets talking about an incident. It was said that an old man had been cheated of money on West Street. Unable to contain his anger, he went to the yamen, but in the end, the yamen simply did not pay any attention to him. Without a second word, they called for an official to drive him out. This old man was extremely angry, and not long after, an imperial edict came from the capital, stripping Qian Wanli of his official position. This was because that old man was actually a high-ranking official in the capital, an Imperial Censor Wang, who was favored by the emperor. Imperial Censor Wang was stubborn and stubborn. He was someone who even dared to admonish the emperor. Normally, he liked to meddle in other people's business, and was willing to meddle in anything that he felt was unfair. Therefore, on that day, Jiang Wan suddenly proposed to go to West Street, solving Imperial Censor Wang's urgent problem. Imperial Censor Wang was still here, and he would certainly have to investigate Chen Zhao's case. Seeing Jiang Wan, who had once had a red plum blossom, naturally, he would not stand by idly and watch her injustice. That red plum blossom was the stone that knocked on Imperial Censor Wang's heart. Imperial Censor Wang prided himself on being absolutely fair, but everyone in the world had a scale in their hearts. Unless one was a saint who was emotionless and desireless, this scale would always be biased towards the side of one's preference. Imperial Censor Wang already had a strong first impression of her. Once Qiu Yen said that she was wrongly accused, Imperial Censor Wang would subconsciously believe her, and would spare no effort to help Jiang Wan find evidence that was beneficial to her. Imperial Censor Wang had made a good move, but the most ingenious part of this move lay in the power of the aftermath. Based on Imperial Censor Wang's upright and stubborn character, upon seeing Jiang Ruan's current situation, he was bound to feel a lot of dissatisfaction towards Jiang Quan, who was also an official of the same court. When he returned to the capital, he would also ruthlessly complain about it. And one could imagine the impact that such words would have on Jiang Quan. Jiang Wan smiled, "Your Excellency's benevolence, Jiang Wan is unable to repay it." Imperial Censor Wang revealed a strange expression, "Are you thanking me for vindicating you, thanking me for sending you back to the Fu, or thanking me for cooperating with you in the court today?" Such an upright person in the officialdom who had stood tall for so many years was naturally not an incompetent person. Jiang Wan was not surprised that he had seen through her, and calmly replied, "Both." Imperial Censor Wang looked at her deeply, "Little girl, don't think too much. Today's effortless effort will be considered as repayment for those few red plum blossoms of yours. You said that the fragrance of plum blossoms comes from the bitter cold, but this old man believes that this saying is even more applicable to you." He shook his head. "Later on, I will have a few yamen runners follow you back to retrieve the things. Everything will be returned to its original owner." Jiang Wan nodded in thanks. Imperial Censor Wang walked a few steps forward, and suddenly stopped. Without turning his head, he spoke with his back facing Jiang Wan, "Oh right, your father did not manage his family strictly, and allowed his daughter to be bullied and humiliated by others. Cultivating one's moral character, managing one's family, and ruling the country to pacify the world, Jiang Quan's harem is still so muddled. Presumably, the officialdom is also biased. After returning to the capital, this old man will submit a report to warn others." Chapter 27. At noon, the people of the residence carried the chests back one after another. The 2 chests were made of yellow pear wood, most of the clothes were worn out, the jewelry was still intact, but the silver could not be retrieved. The servant girl looked at Jiang Wan with some lingering fear. "Miss, everything that could be retrieved has been retrieved. It's nothing, you can leave." Jiang Wan shook her head. Zhang Lan's family loved ease and hated work. When the banknotes were in their hands, they were either taken by Qin Zhao to coax women or taken by Qin Fu to gamble. The jewelry and clothes were taken by Qin Fang, so they escaped the calamity. However, they could not be used anymore. Baiji, Jiang Wan nodded towards the 2 chests, apart from the one mother left behind, take the rest to the pawn shop and pawn them all. It would be best to convert them all into banknotes. Miss, Baiji was slightly shocked, everything. Those are all yours. What use do I have for things that have already been used? Jiang Wan sat down at the table and slowly poured herself a cup of tea. Ever since Zhang Lan's incident, the servant girls of the residence were very afraid of Jiang Wan, and the tea leaves that were sent were this year's new ones. You should at least keep some clothes, Baiji said. In a few days, we will be returning to the capital. It's not good to dress like this. If I don't dress like this, why would father feel sorry for me? Jiang Wan said lightly. Her face was still expressionless, but her eyes were somewhat cold. Baiji was momentarily speechless and did not know how to reply. While she was hesitating, Lian Xiao pushed the door open and entered with a basket of washed vegetables and fruits. She heard the entire conversation between the two and said, exactly, if we return to the original clothes to wear, wouldn't we only care about appearance and not the inside? Wouldn't Miss feel uncomfortable? Besides, Baiji, don't forget, Miss can't wear those clothes now. Didn't you see that Qin Fang isn't wearing any? Baiji thought so and no longer hesitated. She squatted down and carefully picked out Zhao Mei's belongings. The rest of the things were carried out by a few servants to be exchanged for money at the pawn shop. After Baiji left, Lian Xiao put the books back into the box and said hesitantly, Miss, when I was outside today, I heard something. Before she could finish, the door was kicked open from the outside. Chen Fang barged in aggressively and asked, Miss, why did you treat my mother like this? How dare you? Lian Xiao also stood up and said angrily, who gave you the guts to shout in front of a lady? Chen Fang did not back down and said loudly, Young miss, I respect you as a young miss. In the few years that you've been in the manor, hasn't my mother taken good care of you? If it wasn't for my mother, how could you be where you are today? My brother also treated you well. Why did you frame him and put him in prison? Miss, you are so cruel. What nonsense are you talking about? Lian Xiao was furious. What do you mean by framing? It's obvious that Chen Zhao brought this upon himself. He wanted to frame Our Lady. Lian Xiao, Jiang Wan stopped her from speaking and looked at Chen Fang. Suddenly, she smiled, Miss Chen, are you mistaken? Wasn't it you who put Qin Zhao in prison? What do you mean? Chen Fang frowned. Miss Chen, have you forgotten? 10 days ago, you invited me to see that pot of beauty under the moonlight. Jiang Wan picked up the teacup and blew away the foam floating on it. She took a sip and said, speaking of which, your brother and Chunning became fated because of that pot of beauty under the moonlight. At first, Chen Fang did not understand what Jiang Wan was talking about. When she heard the last sentence, she was shocked and said incredulously, you did it on purpose? Chunning went there because of you. What do you think? Jiang Wan asked. Impossible, this is impossible. Chen Fang looked at her with some fear. Even if you lured Chunning there, how could you know what happened later? You can't have planned to this extent. Don't tell me you're a demon. Maybe I'm a demon. You harmed your brother, and your brother harmed your mother, so you can't blame me. Jiang Wan smiled at her. The hot tea moistened her lips to a captivating red. With her black hair and snow-white skin, the smile on her lips was as charming as a spirit. Chen Fang retreated a few steps and shook her head. No, I don't believe it, no. She seemed to be extremely terrified. She turned and ran. Lian Xiao frowned and said, what madness is this? What she eats and wears on a daily basis, which of them does not belong to Miss? She treats Miss like this, yet she still has the nerve to say those words. She is really blinded by lard, disgusting. Jiang Ruan said, didn't she already receive retribution? Everything in the world must have karma. Today, Zhang Lan's family's evil karma is the result of their past karma. Lian Qiao laughed. Miss is still the smart one. Look at how scared she is. Our Miss can predict things like a deity. Jiang Ruan laughed in spite of herself. In her previous life, when she was facing the person who harmed her, in the palace, when she was sad and helpless, one thing she learned was to endure silently. If there was a plot, she should slowly plan it and make use of everything that could be used. Now, it was convenient to use all of this. Thinking of what had happened just now, she asked, "What did you want to say to me just now?" This. Lian Qiao bit her lip. Outside, there are rumors about Master everywhere. They say that Master does not manage the household strictly, allowing the eldest daughter of the Minister of Household to be bullied and humiliated in the rural residence. As she said this, she carefully looked at Jiang Ruan's expression, only to see a faint smile on Jiang Ruan's face. Is that so? Since the residence was already in such an uproar, the people in the capital naturally took great delight in discussing this matter over tea and dinner. Everyone said that the Minister of Household was merciful but cold at heart. They also sighed with emotion at the intelligence of the Jiang family's daughter. The main doors of the Jiang family Fu were tightly shut, and not even a single manservant or servant girl could be seen going out to buy things. In the Jiang Fu, Jiang Quan slammed the booklet in his hand on the study table. His face was ashen as he said, "Scoundrel. Master, the woman who pushed open the door and came in was dressed in pink embroidered with golden butterflies and a red satin dress. She was covered with a 5-colored silk embroidered green and silver rat coat, and wore a jadeite flowery crepe skirt. Her hair was combed into a bun with beaded flowers from the South Sea. It was refreshing and colorful. She had beautiful almond eyes. Although she was dressed as a woman, she was extremely gentle and graceful, and had a strong scholarly air. She put down the food basket in her hand and walked forward to hold Jiang Quan's hand. She said softly, "Master, calm down. Don't get angry and harm your body." When Jiang Quan saw her, the gloominess on his face dissipated a little, but his tone was still full of anger. "Look at what is written in these booklets. They say that I, Jiang Quan, do not manage the household strictly, treat my daughter harshly, ignore my children for 5 years, and cold-blooded and heartless, and am a hypocrite. The emperor has already ordered me to go home and reflect, but now I have become the laughingstock of the court. Zhao Mei, you have raised a good daughter. It has nothing to do with Jijia." Xia Yan anxiously advised, "Ruan, definitely did not do it on purpose. It's just that now, Master, it would be better to bring Ruan back to quell His Majesty's suspicions. Xia will immediately get someone to prepare." "There's no need," Jiang Quan waved his hand, his eyes filled with darkness. "Imperial Censor Wang has already personally prepared a carriage to send her back to the capital." Chapter 28. The journey from Zhuangzi to the capital would take 2 to 3 days at the most. Imperial Censor Wang advocated frugality, so he did not use the soft sedan that Qian Wanli had arranged for them. He only ordered 2 horse carriages. Jiang Ruan's 3 chests had already been sold for banknotes. The remaining chest of books was moved onto the horse carriage, which saved a lot of space. Besides Bai Ji and Lian Qiao, the accompanying maids, Lu Zhu was also brought along. Before leaving, Lu Zhu volunteered to serve Jiang Ruan. Originally, Jiang Ruan had intended to let Xiao Yuan follow along. These 2 maids were clever and daring. However, Xiao Yuan was a daughter of the government and was unwilling to leave her parents, so she politely declined Jiang Ruan's good intentions. Jiang Ruan did not insist and left her a sum of money as repayment for her help. Lu Zhu was a maid bought from outside. After her parents died, she was sold into the hands of human traffickers by relatives. She had traveled extensively and met many people. She was very clever. After a short period of interaction, Bai Ji and Lien Xiao were already very close to her. Because of Jiang Wan and the other womenfolk, Qian Wanli specially arranged for Li Mi and another Yamen runner to escort Jiang Wan back to the capital in order to please Imperial Censor Wang. The journey was peaceful and uneventful. Dewdrop was lively. She talked about the strange things she had seen during her days of traveling with human traffickers. Perhaps she was born optimistic, but what she said was full of interest. She didn't seem depressed at all, but only she knew the sadness in her words. Bai Ji and Lien Xiao naturally understood. Of the two of them, one was gentle and the other extroverted. The three of them chattered incessantly. Jiang Wan leaned against the carriage with a book in her hand. She had her own taste. More than half of the 2-day journey had passed. After resting tonight, they would probably reach the capital by noon tomorrow. Li Mi and another Yamen runner, Xiao Ma, followed Imperial Censor Wang in another horse carriage. The sky gradually turned dark. Li Mi heard that there was a temple up ahead. Seeing that it was wilderness everywhere, it would be difficult to find an inn. After asking Jiang Wan, they decided to stay for the night. The temple was considered big, but the incense was not very strong. Perhaps because it was deep in the wilderness, there were only a few people and even a few monks. Bai Ji and Lien Xiao had not been to a temple for a very long time. When Zhao Mei was still around, she would often bring Jiang Wan to Putua Temple to pray for blessings. After Zhao Mei passed away, Jiang Wan moved to the rural residence and her life became increasingly harsh. She had neither time nor money, and the money spent on incense oil was also money. Asking Bodhisattva for blessings also had a price. Lu Zhu was not unfamiliar with temples. While Bai Ji and Lien Xiao were tidying the house, she had already walked around the temple according to Jiang Wan and brought back. Lu Zhu was not unfamiliar with temples. While Ji and Lien Xiao were cleaning, she brought back some vegetarian dishes. Night had fallen. As Censor Wang, Li Mi, and the other two were men, they were arranged to stay on the other side of the temple. Li Mi was a little hesitant, but she thought that her reputation was more important. Although the temple was spacious, they could still make it if anything happened. Night fell. Imperial Censor Wang, Li Mi, and Lien Xiao were men, so they were arranged to live on the other side of the temple. Li Mi was a little hesitant, but she thought that her reputation was more important. Although the temple was spacious, they could still make it in time if anything happened. Lien Xiao used a pair of scissors to cut the overgrown wick of the oil lamp. The light appeared brighter. Jiang Wan put down the book in her hands and rubbed her temples. "Miss, it's so late, shouldn't you rest?" Bai Ji asked. In the past, Jiang Wan would have been resting by this time. But today, she was very energetic and had no intention of collapsing. "Don't worry, there's a good show tonight." Jiang Wan smiled. She recalled what she had asked Li Mi in the carriage. "Darren, is this temple the only way back to the capital?" "Yes," Li Mi replied, "and there's only one temple in the vicinity." "Lu Zhu," Jiang Wan replied. Lu Zhu pushed the door open and entered. Smiling, she said, "It's all done." Mississippi. Late at night in the winter, the temple fell into a deathly silence. Only the whimpering of the wind could be heard. The lights had all been extinguished. Only the pale moonlight of the waning moon shone on the snow-covered ground. In an instant, large dark clouds covered the sky, firmly blocking the faint moonlight. Under the heavens, there was only darkness. In the darkness, a few sneaky silhouettes suddenly appeared in the courtyard. The silhouettes checked a few rooms and entered one of them in a single file. All was quiet in the courtyard, except for the sound of a bell or two. The young girl in the darkness opened her eyes. A trace of coldness flashed through them. She smiled and said softly, "Lien Xiao, Bai Ji." The two servant girls nodded, got up, pushed open the door, and walked out. Jiang Yuan stood in the room. She had already arranged everything in the room next door. She had not slept in that room. She had hidden in the neighboring room for so long. Finally, she had caught a turtle in a jar. In her previous life, when she had returned to the Fu, she had also stayed in a temple like this. Her memory was too vague. She only remembered that the monks and abbot of the temple were extremely harsh on the vegetarian food and the room they slept in. She did not understand why at the time. Now that she thought about it, it must have been the doing of Xia Yan and her daughter. But at that time, they still needed her as a chess piece to enter the palace, so they had only made things difficult for her. Now that she had shaken her body and returned to the Jiangfu with such great fanfare as Gao Yi's daughter, Xia Yan and Jiang Su would not be too happy in their hearts. On the last day, there would always be obstacles on her way back to the Fu. Only this time, what they wanted was her life. There was no incense left in the temple. She had accepted Xia Yan's money and worked for Xia Yan. With good intentions, she had left a small number of monks here. She had also, considerately, considered Jiang Ruan's reputation as a boudoir and separated men and women. If anything happened, she would have no way to seek help and could only suffer alone. But now, she was an evil spirit that had returned from hell. It had always been her who came to claim lives. A light bell rang from the room next door. That was a secret signal. Very good. She had placed a large amount of sleeping gas in the room. Lu Zhu had taken the antidote in advance. Once the people sent by Xia Yan entered the room, they would only be at the mercy of others. Early the next morning, she would throw the bodies of these people in front of the Buddha statue in the temple. Li Mi was originally a yamen runner, so it was necessary to investigate clearly. As for how the head monk would explain himself, he would let them justify themselves. Jiang Yuan straightened her skirt and prepared to open the door to the next room to take a look. Just as she reached the door, it was suddenly pushed open and a figure flashed in from outside. Jiang Yuan was startled and hurriedly retreated a few steps. The other party seemed to have not expected that there would be someone in the room. His movements were slightly sluggish. In a short moment, Jiang Yuan had retreated too quickly and accidentally stepped on the oversized hem of her skirt. She leaned back and was about to fall. The other party's movements were also fast. Seeing that she was about to fall, he subconsciously reached out and grabbed her waist. In a short moment, their bodies were very close. Jiang Ruan's face touched the other party's ice-cold clothing with black scales. She was stunned. In an instant, the dark clouds receded and the moonlight flooded the window. Jiang Yuan raised her head and met a pair of eyes that were like cold stars. Chapter 29. Jiang Yuan shook her head and gestured for her to keep quiet. She said softly, "Stay here and don't move." Then, she dragged one of the people on the ground and walked towards the door. Lian Xiao wanted to follow, but was pulled by Lu Zhu, so she could only give up. Jiang Yuan dragged them back and forth 5 times, and finally, all 5 of them were dragged to the young man in black. Jiang Yuan understood in her heart that since this person's followers were so brilliant, his master must not be ordinary. However, he had not shown himself tonight, so he must be hiding from something. Since he was hiding, he had to keep his mouth shut. He did not kill her, the daughter of the Jiang family, because it might bring him trouble. However, these 5 unknown people could be dealt with at will. Initially, she wanted to do it herself, but now that there was a ready-made method to kill them, it was even better. No matter what, she would not be suspected, and she could be cleanly washed away. Was he asking if she wanted to silence them? Jiang Yuan sneered in her heart, only to hear the young man in black lightly say, "No need." She suddenly smiled, "Your Excellency, there are still fish that escaped the net." Thinking of this, her mood inexplicably improved. Jiang Yuan smiled at the young man in black, "The road has been cleared, Your Excellency can go first." Suddenly, she heard the faint sound of swords colliding outside. Jiang Wuan was stunned, and suddenly reacted. The young man in black looked at her indifferently, and did not speak. There was no benefit in killing her, and it might only bring trouble. Jiang Wuan had already laid out the pros and cons, and it was up to the other party to decide. The young man in black turned to stare at her, and Jiang Wuan said, "Wait a moment." She then got up and walked to the next room. In the next room, Bai Ji and the other two had just tied up the unconscious people, and were completely unaware of what was happening outside. Seeing Jiang Wuan come in, Lian Xiao asked, "Miss, look." The young man in black glanced at her, turned around, and put away the dagger in his hand. Jiang Wuan breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that the other party was not prepared to kill her, but it might not be because of her threat. The two of them were too close to each other. The touch from their waist was cold, and so was their breathing. This should have been an ambiguous action. One of them was cold, and the other was vigilant. Both of them were not aroused at all. The black-clothed youth's gaze fell on her body. Jiang Wuan understood that her current clothing was simple and crude. Due to deliberate instructions, she was wearing old clothes that she had previously changed from the rural residence. She was afraid that the other party was suspicious of her identity, so she said, "Imperial Censor Wang and Official Li Mi are both in the male's compartment. If something were to happen to me, they would certainly not be able to escape responsibility. I'm afraid that they will investigate for a long time." "Who are you?" The black-clothed youth finally opened his mouth to ask. His voice was as cold as jade in a cold pond. Jiang Ruan's mind raced. These people must have come for this youth. Just now, in such a short period of time, these people had died without alerting the other people in the temple. This youth dressed in black most likely had a significant background. If he could make use of it, Jiang Wuan stood on her tiptoes. Her height only reached the other's chest. With some difficulty, she moved closer to the other's ear and softly said in a low voice, "I didn't see anything." The Minister of War, Jiang Quan's eldest daughter, Jiang Wuan replied. Jiang Quan's position in the imperial court was considered important. Once this identity could be used, she would not be stingy in making use of it. She was not afraid of any accidents. Firstly, in her previous life's memory, the Jiang family did not have such an enemy. Secondly, even if she was extremely unlucky, if this person really had a grudge with the Jiang family, he would certainly know that her position in the Jiang family was lowly. She was only a daughter and would not have any influence on Jiang Quan. The black-clothed youth glanced at her. His eyes were like cold stars, making it difficult to read his emotions. They were exceptionally cold. Then, he turned around and walked into the night. Jiang Wuan stared at his back as he walked. His movements were like floating clouds and flowing water. She could only see a kind of reserved elegance, as if it was inscribed in his bones and flowed through his marrow. It was impossible to conceal it from the outside, and it revealed itself unconsciously. She had never seen such an outstanding appearance and elegance in both her previous and current lives. She frowned. When did the great Jin dynasty have such a person? Who was he? The youth stopped what he was doing and watched her walk forward. The distance between the two of them was only a finger's width. They were already very close. Even though Jiang Ruan's heart was like a boulder, when she saw the person in front of her, she could not help but be absent-minded for a moment. There was no one in the temple, so Xia Yan would not have sent two groups of people to kill her. If it was not for her, then it should have been because of this youth. Now that she had just solved a problem, she had fallen into such a situation. She did not know whether this person would kill her to silence her. After all, her appearance was an accident. After a moment of contemplation, Jiang Wuan slowly walked forward. Her movements were deliberately slow, completely showing that she had no evil intentions. Just as she opened the door, she saw a black shadow rush in from outside. He bowed to the black-clothed youth and said, "Master, it's done." The black-clothed youth's appearance was rare in this world. He had slender eyebrows, starry eyes, snow-white skin, and thin lips. However, he did not look like a boy or a girl. On the contrary, he was angular and had a threatening heroic spirit. He lowered his eyes to look at Jiang Yuan. There was not the slightest ripple in his eyes, and they were extremely cold. This posture was subtle, as if she had been taken advantage of. Jiang Yuan instantly woke up with a start. She was secretly annoyed. She only felt that his beauty was like that of a demon. In the blink of an eye, she retreated 2 steps, distancing herself from the black-clothed youth. Both of them had been chased in a lonely temple on a snowy night. Their fates should be similar. She spoke extremely generously, as if she had been taken advantage of. However, how could the 2 people opposite her not see through this method of killing with a borrowed knife? Only, what she said was extremely reasonable. The black-clothed youth gently waved his hand. The attendant beside him raised his sword and advanced. In a moment, there were 5 cold glints. The person on the ground was dead. Jiang Yuan once again raised her head to look at the other person. When she had retreated, the other person had already leaned against the door. She did not know when, but an exquisite dagger had appeared in his hand. He was thoughtfully fiddling with it. His gaze did not look at Jiang Yuan, but Jiang Yuan believed that as long as she made the slightest movement, this person would definitely follow up. Under the moonlight, a group of corpses lay scattered on the ground. They were all dressed in black. The cause of death was a bloody cut on their throats. They had been killed with 1 stab. The black-clothed youth and the attendant beside him waited for her to dispel their doubts. Jiang Yuan smiled and said, "These people have been drugged by sleeping gas. Their bodies cannot move, but their consciousness is very clear. For example, my conversation with Your Excellency at this moment has been heard by them. Once they wake up, I do not know what kind of trouble they will bring to Your Excellency. Therefore, I will do you a favor and send these people to Your Excellency. Please deal with them." The black-clothed youth was slightly startled. He lowered his head to examine her. Jiang Yuan frowned. She noticed that the other person was wearing clothes with black Chilean ice patterns. He was certainly not an ordinary person. After thinking for a while, she continued, "Your Excellency is hiding here. Naturally, you do not want to make a big deal out of this matter. If you kill me, I am afraid that there will be a little trouble. Although this trouble is not impossible to solve, it is not what you want." When the person who had addressed the youth as master raised his head and saw Jiang Yuan, he was also startled. It seemed that he had not expected that there would be someone awake in the temple. He hesitated and said, "Master." Chapter 30. The night passed. Early the next morning, there were all kinds of noises in the monastery, and the sound of knocking on the door could be heard. Li Mi's voice revealed some anxiety, Miss Jiang, Miss Jiang." Jiang Yuan propped herself up from the bed and ordered Bai Ji and the others to go out and take a look. At the same time, she quickly put on her clothes. When she put on her coat and went out to take a look, a strong smell of blood assaulted her. Li Mi saw that Jiang Yuan was fine and breathed a big sigh of relief. He asked nervously, "Miss, are you all right?" Jiang Yuan looked at him doubtfully, for Darren to ask like this, "Did something happen?" She then looked behind Li Mi and cried out in alarm. She turned her head and said with some fear, the snow-covered ground was littered with corpses and blood flowed everywhere. It was as if a massacre had just occurred. Bai Ji and the others quickly stood in front of Jiang Yuan to protect her. Li Mi shook his head, "Last night, the thieves came here, and this morning it was like this. I was afraid that Miss Jiang might have met with an accident. Fortunately, nothing happened." Jiang Yuan frowned, "Then, why am I fine?" "It shouldn't be because of you." Li Mi said sternly, "It could be an ordinary revenge, and no innocent people were harmed. However, I have to stay behind to investigate this matter. Miss Jiang, this is my duty. I'm sorry, but I have to stay behind today. The rest of the journey is not far, Xiao Ma will escort you back to the capital. Jiang Wan hurriedly returned the greeting, Darren need not worry about me. On the contrary, the matter here is more important. Human lives are at stake, and the people in the monastery are bound to be involved. I don't know if I can help. Seeing the sincerity in her words, Li Mi comforted her, Miss Jiang worries too much. This matter has nothing to do with Miss Jiang at all. The monastery needs to be thoroughly investigated. Miss Jiang, it's best if you leave early. Do not delay your return to the capital. What he said was not false. Although the people in the monastery had their reasons to be suspicious, Jiang Wan was the least suspicious one. Firstly, she had just happened to pass by here to stay. Secondly, the corpses all over the ground were the handiwork of people with martial arts. Such a massacre last night did not alarm anyone in the monastery. This showed that the killer's martial arts were high, and it was even more impossible for Jiang Wan and the other 3 weak women. Since things had come to this point, it would be more trouble to request to stay. Jiang Wan ordered Bai Ji and the rest to pack up before following Imperial Censor Wang onto the carriage to bid farewell to Li Mi. The rest of the journey was very close to the capital. Around noon, the carriage arrived at the gate of the capital. Dewdrop had never been to the capital. She curiously lifted a corner of the carriage curtain and exclaimed, "This is the capital. I've always heard people say that the capital is prosperous. Now it seems that it's true. It's so beautiful." Bai Ji and Lian Qiao also looked out. The two of them had been away from the capital for 5 years. Returning to the capital once again, there was only an indescribable excitement in their hearts. They were happy for Jiang Wan, and there was a kind of happiness after suffering. Jiang Wan, on the other hand, did not have the slightest bit of their cheerful expression. She slowly lifted the corner of the curtain on her side, and just happened to see a jet-black steed brushing past the carriage. That steed was a rare precious treasure, and she could not help but take a few more glances at it. When she looked again, she could only faintly see the silhouette of its back. She only felt that the figure on the horse's back was incomparably graceful. Jiang Wan smiled faintly and began to size up her surroundings. The streets of the capital were bustling, and the crowds were jostling shoulder to shoulder. It coincided with what she remembered. She recalled that when she had left the capital to go to the rural residence, she had also left the capital in a mourning carriage with a few lonely attendants. Coming and going, she had been separated by a lifetime. When she returned, she was no longer the same person from the past. She raised her head and the wind outside slowly blew on her face, feeling the capital's sparse winter breeze. Lian Qiao was just about to ask Jiang Wan to lower the curtain to prevent her from catching a cold, but when she turned her head and saw the expression on Jiang Ruan's face, she could not help but be startled. She only felt that her young lady's gaze was cold and indifferent. Although there was no expression on her face, there was an incomparably gloomy and cold aura, as if she was an evil spirit that had returned from hell. When the carriage reached a place not far from the Jiangfu, Imperial Censor Wang and Jiang Wan parted ways. Now that he had lodged a complaint against Jiang Quan, he was already very disdainful of Jiang Quan, and was even more unwilling to see him. He let Xiaoma drive the carriage to send Jiang Wan and the others back to the Jiangfu, and left first. The closer they got to the Jiangfu, the more nervous Bai Ji and the others in the carriage became. To them, the Jiangfu might mean an improvement in their lives, but it also meant the beginning of a struggle. On the contrary, Jiang Wan appeared to be the calmest of them all, but the raging hatred in her heart was something that only she knew. The Jiangfu was located on the most prosperous street in the capital. Because they had received the news from a servant boy, everyone in the Jiangfu had come out to welcome this daughter of the Jiang family. Since Jiang Quan was not present, Xia Yan personally came out to welcome her. The wrath of the emperor, coupled with the rumors of the common people, Only by showing that the Jiang Fu valued this daughter of the Jiang family very much could this storm gradually subside. Some of the common people saw Xia Yan personally coming out with her servant girls, and understood the ins and outs of the matter. Unexpectedly, there were some who stood at the entrance of the Jiang Fu and did not leave, waiting to watch the excitement. After a while, the entrance of the Jiang Fu was surrounded by many people. Xia Yan did not order the retainers to drive them away. The more people there were, the easier it was to bear witness. The carriage rumbled along, and finally stopped at the entrance of the Jiang Fu. "Eldest young miss has returned." An old woman standing beside Xia Yan exclaimed loudly. Suddenly, a gentle smile floated on Xia Yan's face. The crowd of onlookers looked curiously at the carriage. Jiang Ruan's actions in the court had already spread throughout the capital. Everyone wanted to see how this virtuous, yet bitter, daughter of the Jiang family looked like. Very quickly, two servant girls alighted from the carriage. One of them helped to lift the curtain, while the other stretched out her hand to support the person in the carriage. "De Jie." A pleasantly surprised voice rang out, and a young girl dressed in white walked out from behind the door of the Jiang Fu. This young girl was about 10 years old, but she was already an outstanding beauty. She was as graceful as an ink painting, and her pair of beautiful eyes seemed to contain clouds. She wore a rouge-embroidered lily coat skirt with white brocade, which made her fair skin look even more like jade. Her lips were pink and tender like cherries, and her most beautiful feature was the tear mole under her eye, which was lovely and moving, like a fairy in the clouds. There were no ornaments on her body, only 2 jade-green ribbons in her hair, which made one's heart feel soft, elegant and refined. Some people recognized her. The eldest daughter of the Jiang Fu was not favored, so there were only a few people who knew Jiang Ruan's name. However, Jiang Su's name was known throughout the capital. She was the Jiang family's pearl in the palm of their hands. She was exceptionally beautiful, and had outstanding talent. She was the #1 beauty in the capital. With this stunning little beauty at the side, there were fewer people looking at the carriage. "Miss, slow down." A crisp voice suddenly sounded from inside the carriage. In an instant, a slender jade-like hand stretched out. This hand was as fair as jade, and it looked as if it could not be grasped, as if it was boneless. It was only a hand, but for some reason, it caused the hearts of the people present to sway. The gazes that had been attracted by Jiang Su unexpectedly returned to the carriage. Chapter 31. Jiang Ruan raised her eyes to look. The one who had spoken was precisely the Shu daughter, Jiang Li, who was born to the Jiang family's second Yinyang. Jiang Li's facial features were more similar to Jiang Quan's. She was born with a somewhat unkind disposition, and lacked the gentleness and beauty of a woman. She looked at Jiang Ruan and suddenly covered her mouth as she laughed. "De Jie is so beautiful, why is there a need for you to wear such clothes? Could it be that you are afraid that your sisters will be envious of Jie's clothes, so you are hiding them?" Cui Er didn't wait for Lian Qiao to loosen her grip and took the initiative to hold the box. Before Lian Qiao could loosen her grip, Cui Er had already taken 2 steps forward. With a snap, the box broke in the middle. The buckle on the top was already loose, so when Cui Er fell, it was shaken loose. The lid of the box fell over, and the contents of half of the box poured out with a crash. Even though she had already reminded herself many times in her heart, the moment she saw Jiang Su, Jiang Ruan could not help but feel her breathing stagnate for a moment. Hatred blotted out the sky and covered the earth. It was this pure and harmless face that had caused her to ruin her entire life. Amidst the turbulent undercurrents, the crowd was completely unaware. She only thought that when the eldest daughter of the Jiang family and the second daughter of the Jiang family stood together, it was truly pleasing to the eye. One had bright eyes and a pair of zirconia teeth, looking around with a lingering gaze, while the other was like a weak willow swaying in the wind. The clouds were calm and the breeze was clear. When the two beauties appeared together, her impression of Jiang Wan deepened. Her identity as the daughter of the Jiang family could not be refuted. Jiang Su was sensitive enough to detect the change in Jiang Ruan's gaze. She did not know why, but although the other party was smiling, her gaze was incomparably cold, as if it carried with it a hidden fear. Jiang Su was startled and unconsciously took 2 steps back. The smile on her face also became somewhat stiff. At this time, Jiang Su also walked forward. She tilted her head to look at Jiang Wan and smiled. The Jiejie has finally returned. A few days ago, Mother had been talking about Jiejie's return. Now that we have finally met in person, Mother can finally breathe a sigh of relief. However, among the Jiangfu people, a slightly shrill voice rang out, "Long time no see, the Jiejie has become even more beautiful." These words caused one's imagination to run wild and fanciful. It was as if Jiang Wan had deliberately worn old clothes to give people the truth. There was no lack of people in the crowd who wanted to watch a good show. They understood the twists and turns in the mansion, so they watched with great interest how things would develop next. Generally speaking, the more beautiful a woman was, the easier it was for her to be gaudy. Someone like Jiang Su, who was elegant and refined, would be an exceptional beauty for a long time. However, this girl with cotton clothes and braided hairpins had extremely beautiful facial features. Her expression was gentle and distant, carrying an indescribable sense of stability, as if she had experienced many heavy years. She did not appear frivolous, only calm beauty. He was clearly still young, but his every movement had a kind of mature elegance. She slowly raised her head, revealing a delicate oval face. Jiang Su's skin was already very fair, but hers was even fairer than Jiang Su's, as if it could emit a watery light. Perhaps it was because she was tired from the long journey, 2 faint blushes rose on her cheeks. A pair of lustrous eyes lightly swept around, and the corners of her eyes curled up with a faintly discernible charm, causing the hearts of the surrounding people to sway. Jiang Su's clothes were refined, making her appear incomparably elegant. The girl's clothes were old-fashioned, but she looked extremely bright and beautiful. People could not help but wonder, if she were to change into brightly colored clothes, what kind of good color would that be? Jiang Wan smiled and looked at her. Jiang Su was exactly the same as in her memory, elegant and beautiful, innocent and unaffected, as if she was a fairy who was ignorant of the affairs of the world, born to be carefree. The mole under her eyes was still bright, but it was unknown whether it was because she had sucked the blood of the Zhao family to become so red. Jiang Li smiled slightly and whispered a few words to the servant girl beside her. The servant girl walked a few steps to stand in front of Lian Xiao. Jiang Li smiled and said, looking at the Jiejie's 2 servant girls, "They must be very heavy. Let Cui Er help you." Xia Yan hurried over to greet Jiang Wan. She carefully looked at her, held her hand, and softly said, "Good child, you have suffered." Lian Xiao and Baiji nodded their heads in agreement. The 2 of them lifted the curtain of the carriage, and everyone could clearly see that there was only one chest in the carriage. Lian Xiao and Baiji carefully lifted it from the carriage. It seemed that they could not bear the weight, and after a few short steps, they were somewhat out of breath. People guessed what kind of treasure it was. After all, the Jiangfu was considered a rich and noble family. Looking at the situation, there were many treasures in the chest. Could it be that this daughter of the Jiang family was really trying to deceive people, guarding her wealth but pretending to be pitiful to gain sympathy? Jiang Wan took a deep breath in her heart, and smiled, "It's nothing, I have already returned." She spoke softly, and her smile was beautiful and amiable, but it made Xia Yan and her daughter feel an inexplicable ghastly aura, as if those few words had been spat out fiercely. In the prime of her youth, the girl was dressed in plain clothes and only wore a large, dark green cotton-padded jacket. She wore a light gray coarse cloth skirt, and her long hair was loosely tied up with a simple wooden hairpin. 2 loose locks of hair hung down beside her ears, making her small and exquisite ears seem like they were carved from white jade, causing people to move their feet and open their eyes. Jiang Ruan's hands, folded in front of her chest, moved slightly, and her smile deepened. However, the smile did not reach her eyes. Xia Yan was indeed too impatient. This was her first battle since returning to the Jiangfu. If she could not resolve this matter perfectly today, she would have to make new plans to stabilize her position in the future, or maintain her reputation as the daughter of the Jiang family in the capital. Step by step, she walked towards the entrance of the Jiangfu. Those with sharp eyes noticed that the skirt did not move in the slightest. When they looked at the girl walking, her back was perfectly straight, and each step she took could not be picked out of place. Originally, they had thought that the daughter of the Jiang family, who had no one to discipline her in the rural residence, would inevitably behave in public. Now, it seemed that this girl was not only righteous, but also had an excellent upbringing. Her appearance was outstanding, and she was actually on par with the second daughter of the Jiang family, Jiang Su. The wind is strong outside. Be careful that mother and sisters catch a cold. Let's go back inside and talk, Jiang Ruan said softly. Seeing that she had found an excuse to avoid Jiang Li's sharp words, the crowd was disappointed. They thought that this daughter of the Jiang family was also someone who hoped to live out her days in peace and quiet, so they did not have the sharpness that they had in the court. Jiang Ruan continued, Lian Qiao, Bai Ji, carry the chest into the fu as well. The sound tugged at everyone's hearts, and the smile on Jiang Li's face became even more joyous. Everyone stretched their necks to look inside. Xia Yan's mouth was slightly agape, and Jiang Su's face was full of curiosity. Only Jiang Ruan let out a soft sigh. In the carriage, a servant girl supported the daughter of the Jiang family, and finally appeared in front of everyone. Jiang Ruan looked at her with a smile. Xia Yan's eyes were filled with tears, but they were filled with sincerity. If it were not for the lesson of her past life, Jiang Ruan would have almost believed that the other party was treating her with sincerity. However, she still spoke softly, Jiang Ruan is unfilial, and has caused mother to worry. Chapter 32. The wooden chest was overturned on the ground. The high-quality yellow pear wood still exuded a faint fragrance, and out of the inside were volumes of books. The books were well preserved, and it was obvious that the owner had cherished them. It was not surprising that a young lady from a noble family would bring books with her, but what was surprising was that apart from the books, there was no other luggage. Everyone in the Jiangfu had different expressions, and only Jiang Ruan spoke as usual, Lian Qiao, what are you doing in a daze? As if she had just understood, Jiang Su smiled and said, the Jijia really loves to read, a chest full of books. Looking at it, it really makes one envious. Previously, I asked father to give me a collection of Zhuang Qin's poems. Father could not find it, but the Jijia has it. She spoke innocently, as if she was really a little girl who was brooding over a book. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly, it's just a book. Since you and I are sisters, I will let Lu Zhu wrap the book and send it to you later. This chest of books was left behind by mother, and I will protect it even if I have to risk my life. From her words, it was not difficult for the crowd to guess that since she had used the word risk her life, and seeing that the daughter of the Jiangfu had no other luggage besides an old set of clothes, she must have had a hard time these past few years. Everyone understood that she had taken advantage of the situation. It was rare for her to be so filial at such a young age, and to protect the belongings left behind by her deceased mother. It was just that the money had most likely been looted clean. Xia Yan looked at her with a smile, and her fingers in her sleeves slightly shrank, but her expression became even more distressed. I know that you are a child who loves to read. Later, you can be together with Suer, you two sisters have similar interests. Jiang Ruan brushed away the stray hair on her forehead and said softly, my younger sister and I, blood is thicker than water. Naturally, we have similar interests. If not for similar interests, how could she have taken a fancy to a man? If not for similar interests, with the position of daughter in the Jiangfu, how could they not rest until one of them died? Lian Qiao and Bai Ji quickly tidied up the scattered books and took the lead to help carry them back to the Jiangfu. Xia Yan returned to the Fu, and as soon as the main door of the Fu closed, the onlookers gradually dispersed. The moment she stepped through the vermilion door of the Fu, Lu Zhu supported Jiang Ruan's hand. "Miss, slow down, don't fall." Jiang Ruan's steps were steady, and the smile on her face was stern. "Mother, eldest brother, look, I'm back." The vacated courtyard was still being tidied up, so Xia Yan first led Jiang Ruan into the main hall, where several Yinyang were waiting for her. Jiang Su, on the other hand, was very happy along the way. She told Jiang Ruan some interesting things about her family. From afar, it looked like they were in harmony with each other. When they entered the main hall, just as Xia said, the Yinyang said. The leader of the group was a slightly older woman dressed in a brown, straight-fitting jacket and skirt. She smiled amiably at Jiang Ruan, eldest young Mississippi. Jiang Ruan's gaze swept over her. This was the Jiang family's de Yinyang. At that time, after Zhao Mei had gotten pregnant, she had become Jiang Quan's servant girl. Unfortunately, she had not been favored, nor had she gotten pregnant. In the Fu, she had been a mere decoration. Jiang Ruan smiled and returned the greeting. Jiang Li walked to a woman wearing a peach-colored jacket and a long skirt embroidered with peonies. She said coquettishly, "Yinyang." The woman could be considered beautiful. Her long, shapely eyebrows were slightly raised, and her voice was also high. She laughed, "Oh, isn't this eldest miss? I was wondering why Furan asked us to come today. It turns out that eldest miss has returned from the Zhuangzi." Jiang Ruan ignored her harsh words. Second Yinyang was the Shu daughter of the Minister of Appointments, so she had the authority to win her over in the officialdom. Because of the Minister of Appointments' reputation, Second Yinyang was also favored in the Fu. Jiang Li and Xia Yan were very close, and Jiang Ruan had not been on good terms since childhood. When Zhao Mei was still alive, she had suffered a lot at Second Yinyang's hands. Jiang Ruan's gaze fell on the girl standing alone at the side. This was Jiang Dan, the daughter of Third Yinyang. After Third Yinyang gave birth to Jiang Dan, she passed away. When Zhao Mei was alive, Jiang Dan was raised by Zhao Mei's side. Jiang Ruan still remembered that in her past life, when she entered the palace, Jiang Dan was still unmarried. Later on, there was no news of Jiang Dan. She only remembered that in the Fu, Jiang Dan did not seem to like to talk and had a taciturn appearance. The last woman was much younger than the other Yinyang. Jiang Ruan also remembered her. This young woman was also very capable. In her past life, she had almost reached the point where she could compete with Xia Yan as an equal. Her name was Hong Ying, and she was a courtesan of the brothel. Originally, she had been bought by Jiang Quan to be given to his superior as a gift, but later on, for some unknown reason, he had kept a Yinyang for himself. In her past life, she had wholeheartedly relied on Xia Yan, and her attitude towards Hong Ying was also very disgusted. Now, seeing this situation again, she was more than happy. Hong Ying was just as Jiang Ruan remembered. She was delicate and charming, but there was not the slightest trace of the courtesan aura of the brothel. Instead, she looked exquisite and pure, like a crystal. It was no wonder that Jiang Quan, who did not have a preference for female charms, had a whole new level of respect for her. Who would not like such a pure and clean flower? Admittedly, although the house was filled with women, some were playing along, some were momentarily fresh, but the one Jiang Quan truly doted on was Xia Yan alone. Her methods were superb, and coupled with her husband's doting, it was very difficult for her not to have a firm foothold in the Jiang family. Xia Yan had a boy and a girl, Jiang Su and Jiang Chao. Xia Yan explained, "Master brought Chao, to Lord Wang's Fu today. I'm afraid that Wan will only be able to see them in the evening. It was no wonder that she had not seen Jiang Chao's figure in the main hall. Jiang Quan wholeheartedly wanted to bring Jiang Chao into his official career, so he often brought her to the homes of his colleagues. From a young age, she had personally taught him, which was poles apart from his cold attitude towards Jiang Xing. As soon as she thought of her eldest brother, Jiang Ruan's gaze became slightly pained, and she unconsciously clenched her fists in her sleeves. She took a deep breath in her heart before she smiled lightly and said, "There is no need to do all this for me. I am originally a member of the Jiangfu, so going home is just like going home normally." When the surrounding people heard her words, they all fell silent. Jiang Su smiled and said, "De Jijie is right. It's just that De Jijie has just returned to the Fu, and there have been many changes in the Fu these past few years. Why don't we let the moms explain in detail to De Jijie, so that De Jijie won't be able to recognize the way?" Jiang Li also giggled and said, "I'm just afraid that De Jijie will get used to those interesting mountain paths, and will not be used to walking on our Jiangfu's roads." Jiang Wan smiled faintly and said, "How could that be? How could that be? Every blade of grass and every tree in the Jiangfu, along with the blood and tears of her previous life, had long been deeply embedded in her heart. Every person and every place here would always exist in her nightmares. Every time she woke up from the nightmares of her previous life, every scene in her dreams would remind her of what kind of hell the Jiangfu was. She had planted a seed of vengeance here, and now that the seed had been planted, it was just waiting for it to slowly sprout." Chapter 33. Mei Qin Yuan was the courtyard where Zhao Mei used to live. Every blade of grass and every tree had been meticulously taken care of by Zhao Mei. The feng shui master had also come to take a look. After Zhao Mei passed away, Wanju was converted into Yanhua Yuan, where Jiang Su and her daughter lived. Wang Momo, who led the way for Jiang Ruan, was one of Xia Yan's people. Her pair of shrewd triangular eyes kept sizing up Jiang Ruan and the others, and her mouth did not stop. "Eldest miss does not know, but now that there is a new person in the courtyard, and second miss is getting on in years, she has also been allocated an independent courtyard. Now that there is a shortage of rooms, eldest miss's room was specially ordered by Furen. I do not know if eldest miss will like it." As Lu Zhu walked, she looked around. Because she was a new servant girl, the surrounding servants only thought of her as a country girl who had not seen the world, and were curious about the Jiangfu. When they reached a courtyard, Wang Momo smiled and said, "This is it." Jiang Yuan looked around. The courtyard was not big, but she did not have any servants around, so it was more than enough. The inside could be considered clean. When she pushed the door open and walked in, the room was clean and tidy, with all the usual furniture. It was many times better than the one in the estate. Seeing this, Lian Xiao and Bai Ji breathed a sigh of relief and helped to arrange the luggage. Wang Momo saw Jiang Yuan standing in the room, deep in thought, and moved closer to her with a smile. "Although this courtyard is a bit remote, it is peaceful. Fourth Miss's courtyard is not far from here. When you are free, eldest miss can also find a companion, so it will not be boring." Jiang Dan. Jiang Yuan smiled slightly. "I think this courtyard is not bad, thank mother for me, but since this is the courtyard I live in, I also want to change the courtyard's name. I will have to trouble Momo to pass on this to mother for me." Wang Momo smiled in response, and Jiang Yuan walked out of the room to the courtyard's front door. Above the courtyard's door hung a plaque with 3 large words, "Fu Ping Courtyard." What a good Fu Ping courtyard. Xia Yan could indeed read people's minds. If these 3 ordinary words had appeared in her previous life, she would have been depressed for a long time. But now, this Fu Ping courtyard should have another name. In the evening, Wang Momo came over again. Firstly, it was to pass on Xia Yan's message that since the courtyard had been given to her, she could change the name as she pleased. Secondly, it was because Jiang Quan and Jiang Chao had returned a little late today and would not be eating together. Thus, she was allowed to eat by herself. The D daughter had returned to the mansion, but her father wasn't even willing to see her. One could imagine how cold he was. Hearing Wang Momo's words, Bai Ji and Lian Xiao's hearts turned cold. Currently, the person closest to Jiang Wan in the Jiang Fu was Jiang Quan, but now that Jiang Quan had slapped her in the face like this, Jiang Ruan's days in the future would be even more difficult than they had imagined. While Bai Ji and Lian Xiao were preoccupied with their own thoughts, Lu Zhu stood beside Jiang Wan, who was writing, and said rather happily, "Miss handwriting is really beautiful." Two large characters were written on the snow-white rice paper, Huan Ju. It was truly imposing. It was said that seeing the words was like seeing the person. The strokes of the words were smooth, yet there was a faint sharpness to it. It was as if she had hidden the melancholy in her heart under a calm appearance. At first glance, she looked as kind as water, but in fact, she was full of murderous intent. "You can read?" Jiang Wan asked Lu Zhu. Lu Zhu shook her head, "I can't read, but this servant knows that Miss handwriting is good." Jiang Wan laughed in spite of herself. Xia Yan, who was once the most talented woman in the great Jin dynasty, had easily agreed to change the name of the courtyard. She appeared to be very magnanimous, but in reality, she wanted to see Jiang Wan make a fool of herself. She wanted to change the words on the plaque, but she had just returned to the Fu and did not have a single copper coin, so she could only write it herself. However, since she had entered the rural residence at the age of 5, no one had taught her how to read and write. Everyone thought that she had long since become an idiot who could not read a single word. If she could really write it, who knew how to make a fool of herself? Lu Zhu doubtfully asked, "Miss has never learned how to read in the rural residence, how did you learn?" How did she learn? Jiang Ruan's gaze fell on the xian paper in front of her. In her previous life, she had also been taught by Xia Yan to become an idiot beauty. All she had learned was to play the zither and dance. So much so that whenever the common people of the great Jin dynasty mentioned her, they would despise her and say, "That idiot beauty, only knows the skills of a lowly singer. She's much worse than that talented younger sister of hers." Ever since she had been sent to the palace, there were countless women who were skilled in dancing and the zither. In order to gain favor, she had been forced to undergo many devil-like training. Among them, learning how to write had been personally taught by the 8th prince. At that time, under the rain of petals, he had taught her how to hold a brush and write on the snow-white xian paper, "Exquisite sieve with red beans, deep in the bones of yearning, do you know these touching words?" Who would have thought that it was just a play? Now, it seemed that she should thank the 8th prince. The 8th prince's handwriting was one of the most distinguished in the great Jin dynasty. He had always said that her handwriting was soft and not firm enough, which was why she had ultimately lost her life. Now, her handwriting was still smooth and soft, but she did not know whether he could see the murderous intent within it. Jiang Wan smiled, picked up the xian paper from the table, blew on it, and handed it to Lu Zhu, "Frame it and mount it on the courtyard gate." Bai Ji and Lian Xiao looked at it and laughed, "Huan Ju, what a good name. Mrs. handwriting is so good, if only eldest young master could see it." After saying this, they realized that they had said the wrong thing and looked at Jiang Ruan with some unease. Jiang Ruan's gaze paused. When Zhao Mei had passed away, she had been sent to the rural residence. Jiang Xing had knelt in the ancestral hall for a day and a night, but in the end, he had not been able to change Jiang Quan's mind. In a fit of anger, Jiang Xing had thrown himself into the army camp. Before he left, he had repeatedly warned her that she must return home in glory so that no one would dare to bully her. During those unbearably painful days, Jiang Xing had been her only pillar of support. Later, on a certain day in the rural residence, news came from the Jiangfu, but it was said that Jiang Xing had died on the battlefield, and not even his bones were left. She suddenly remembered that in her previous life, when the news of his death came, it seemed to have happened 2 years later. Now, it was still 2 years ago. Could there still be a turning point? Thinking of this, Jiang Ruan suddenly became excited. If Jiang Xing was still alive, then she would not be alone in this world. But how could she know whether Jiang Xing was still alive? And how could she reverse his fate? Lian Xiao saw Jiang Ruan's tightly knitted brows, her expression unreadable, and worriedly asked, "Miss?" "Lian Xiao, when mother passed away, I was bedridden and did not know what was happening outside. I only knew that eldest brother had knelt in the ancestral hall for a day and a night. Later, eldest brother bid farewell to me. You and Bai Ji were both outside. Let me ask you, do you know which military master eldest brother had pledged his allegiance to?" Lian Xiao stared blankly and looked at Bai Ji. She shook her head and said, "This, eldest young master did not say, so this servant does not know either. However, this servant remembers very clearly that at that time, the Hu people were stirring up trouble at the border. The Chen family army and General Guan were both recruiting new soldiers, but I do not know which one it was." Chapter 34. The first day back at the Jiangfu passed amidst the turbulent undercurrents. The weather was excellent the next day. Early in the morning, Lian Xiao and Bai Ji went to inquire about Jiang Xing. Because Lu Zhu knew nothing about the past of the Jiangfu, she would not be able to help, so she simply stayed by Jiang Ruan's side and took care of the matters surrounding Wanju. The sunlight shone through the window and filled the room. Lu Zhu sat at the door doing her embroidery and said with a smile, "The weather is good in the capital. The sun is more comfortable, and the people are steady under the sun." Jiang Ruan declined to comment. The courtyard of Wanju was already very remote, and there were not many places where the sun shone. It was much worse than the previous Meiqing Yuan. The sunlight in Meiqing Yuan was truly beautiful. When Zhao Mei was still alive, she would lie on Zhao Mei's knees and watch Jiang Xing practice his swordplay. The locust flowers fluttered down, and that scene could be called beautiful. Now, things remained the same, but the people had changed. Zhao Mei had long passed away, and Jiang Xing's fate was unknown. In the world, she was the only one left. Jiang Ruan tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and continued to read the book in her hands. At this moment, Bai Ji hurriedly walked in and said in a low voice, "Miss, it's not good. Lian Xiao and the people from Yanhua Yuan are quarreling." "What happened?" Jiang Ruan frowned. Although Lian Xiao is impatient, she knows what's good for her. Why would they quarrel on the first day? Lu Zhu also put down her embroidery and looked at Bai Ji. Bai Ji paused and looked at Jiang Ruan with some hesitation before saying with difficulty, "When Lian Xiao and I returned to the Fu, we saw the people from Yanhua Yuan teaching the servants a lesson. At first, we did not pay attention, but later, Lian Xiao saw that person's face. It was Zhou Momo. Wet nurse." Jiang Ruan was surprised. Zhou Momo was Jiang Xing and Jiang Ruan's wet nurse. She was someone that Zhao Mei had brought over from her maiden home. When Zhao Mei had passed away, the Fu had said that Zhou Momo, upon seeing that her mistress had passed away, begged to leave the Fu to retire. From then on, there had been no news of her. In her previous life, Jiang Ruan had never seen Zhou Momo again. But now, Bai Ji was saying that Zhou Momo was still in the Jiangfu. Lu Zhu was also an intelligent person. From the conversation between the two of them, she could sense the importance of Zhou Momo, so she said, "Why is Sister Lian Xiao fighting with them? Could it be that Zhou Momo is being bullied badly?" Bai Ji met Jiang Ruan's sharp gaze, and with great difficulty, she said, "Zhou Momo, she." When this servant and Lian Xiao saw her, she was pouring out night incense. The people of Yanhua Yuan said that she had sprinkled the night incense on the new clothing that Furen was preparing to wear when meeting Jun. A. N. G. Fei. They wanted to punish her by forcing Zhou Momo to eat what was in the bowl. Jiang Ruan's eyes narrowed, and her whole body abruptly emitted a wave of anger. Even Lu Zhu, who had never met Nanny Zhou before, couldn't help but cover her mouth and angrily say, "This is too much." Jiang Ruan frowned tightly, her eyes blazing with fury. What a Yan Huayuan, what a Xia Yan. Presumably, in her previous life, Zhou Momo had also been subjected to this kind of inhumane torture right under her eyes, but she had been completely ignorant of the pain. Now that Zhou Momo had reappeared in front of Bai Ji and Lian Xiao, it was most likely also Xia Yan's deliberate arrangement. To let her see that Zhou Momo was living a life worse than death in the Jiangfu, and then use Zhou Momo to attack her. Was this humiliation, or was it a test? Miss, Lian Xiao has a fiery temper and started arguing with the people from Yan Huayuan. The people from Yan Huayuan are not easy to deal with either. They have the advantage in numbers. This servant thought that if this were to continue, Lian Xiao would be at a disadvantage, so I came back to look for you. Does Miss have any ideas? The people of Yan Huayuan will not take this lying down. Lu Zhu, go and fetch my clothes. Jiang Ruan closed the book on the table and stood up. Is Miss going to save Sister Lian Xiao? Lu Zhu deftly handed Jiang Ruan an outer garment as she asked, do you want to inform Master? There's no need. Jiang Ruan coldly said, when he arrives, I won't be able to protect Lian Xiao. Bai Ji was startled, is Miss going to clash with the people of Yan Huayuan? Others have already come to bully us to our doorstep. Could it be that we are going to be a tortoise that withdraws its head? Jiang Ruan glanced at her and said indifferently, since they have come to provoke us, how can we not meet them head-on? The three of them quickly packed up and followed Bai Ji to the garden at the entrance of Yan Huayuan. From afar, they could see a group of servant girls surrounding two people in the middle. One was paralyzed on the ground, and the other was protecting the person on the ground. The air was filled with a strange smell. Two ceremonial buckets were placed not far away, and one of them was already tilted to the ground. Seeing Jiang Ruan and the other two, the surrounding servant girls did not move until Lian Xiao called out, Mississippi. The leading servant girl turned her head and pretended to speak carelessly, why has eldest Miss come? The place of these lower-class people should not pollute your eyes. Eldest Miss should leave quickly. Jiang Ruan recognized this servant girl. She was Xia Yan's personal servant girl, Lin Lang. In her previous life, Jiang Ruan did not understand how Xia Yan, who was so gentle and well-mannered, could have such a harsh and sarcastic personal servant girl. But now, she understood that Lin Lang was actually Xia Yan's true self. What Xia Yan could not say, was all said through Lin Lang's mouth. For example, now, she was ridiculing Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly, what you say makes sense, so you should leave quickly. Don't pollute my eyes. Lin Lang was stunned. When she saw Jiang Ruan, she asked doubtfully, what, are you not a lower-class person? Her tone was gentle, but her words were sharp. Her expression was smiling, but her coquettish eyes were like a cold knife. Lin Lang unconsciously took a step back. Jiang Ruan sighed, it turns out that Lin Lang thinks that servant girls are upper-class people, so you beat and kill other servants. Nubi did not, Lin Lang was a little flustered. Jiang Ruan's words implied that she was a big servant bullying her master. In the Jiangfu, although she was favored by Xia Yan, she could not bear the consequences of being a big servant bullying her master, eldest Miss, Nubi really did not. Jiang Ruan smiled lightly and ignored her. She turned her head to look at Lian Xiao. Lian Xiao was surrounded by several servant girls. Her clothes were somewhat disheveled. Presumably, the argument just now had been intense. Jiang Ruan's face had a clear handprint. Jiang Ruan's expression darkened. She then looked at one of the servant girls' faces. The handprint was also vivid and lifelike. Lian Xiao was not someone who was willing to be at a disadvantage. The person lying on top of Lien Xiao had not said a word since Jiang Wan arrived. He only hung his head and remained motionless, as if he was a lifeless sculpture. Only a head full of messy white hair and a thin, paper-thin winter clothing could be seen. Jiang Wan reached out and placed her hand on the shoulder of the person on the ground. The moment her hand touched the person, she sensitively felt the other party tremble fiercely. Lien Xiao opened her mouth, but in the end, she did not say anything. Jiang Wan looked at the middle-aged woman with her head hung low and gently said, "Nanny, don't be afraid. I am R1. I have returned." Chapter 35. The moment Jiang Wan opened her mouth to speak, the person on the ground trembled, and finally slowly raised her head. Jiang Wan held her breath and slowly clenched her fists. Zhou Momo's weather-beaten face was full of wrinkles, and she was so skinny that she looked like a bag of bones. Her cheeks, which used to be slightly blessed, were now deeply sunken. The most frightening thing was her pair of eyes. Only dry eye sockets were left, and it was clear that her eyeballs had been gouged out. Dewdrop let out an "ah," and immediately covered her mouth, unable to bear to look anymore. This elderly woman had obviously gone through many painful experiences, and her whole body emitted a rancid and unpleasant smell. Her eyes were blind, and she could only raise her head blankly. Her lips wriggled as she said in a trembling voice, "Eldest Mississippi, it's me." Jiang Wan did not care about the strange gazes of the people around her. She bent down and hugged Zhou Momo in her arms. Her eyes were as cold as ice, but her voice had a strange charm as she comforted, "Nanny, R1 is back." Time seemed to rewind to a few years ago, when she and Jiang Xing were still young and ignorant children. Every time they made Zhao Mei angry, it was Zhou Momo who helped to mediate. When she and Jiang Xing got into trouble and were punished to kneel, it was also Zhou Momo who quietly went to the ancestral hall in the middle of the night to bring them food. Zhou Momo had no children in her entire life, and she treated them as her own. Now, the pair of loving and smiling eyes were only a pair of empty eye sockets. How could people remain indifferent? Lin Lang frowned, "Eldest miss, what are you doing? Don't dirty yourself. This servant has made a big mistake, and this servant needs to quickly punish her. If eldest miss has nothing else to say, please step back a little." Before Jiang Wan could speak, Lien Xiao said, "Since Miss is here, the matter of the servants should be decided by Mississippi. How can a servant like you interfere with the matters of the masters?" Lin Lang smiled, and another servant girl beside her said, "What you said is wrong. We are all acting on the orders of the masters. Lin Lang Jiejie's master is Furen. Although eldest miss is also the master of the Fu, the one in charge of the household is Furen. No matter how old eldest miss is, you cannot surpass Furen. Eldest miss, please do not make things difficult for us servants." "You." Lien Xiao still wanted to speak, but Jiang Wan had already spoken, "What you said is correct. It seems that all of you have come under Furen's orders to punish this servant who has made a mistake." In her arms, Zhou Momo's body was still trembling slightly. Jiang Wan patted her shoulder and said with a smile, "You all acted on master's orders, and indeed, there was nothing wrong with that. However, I have some doubts. According to the Jiang Fu's rules, if a servant commits a mistake, he or she will have to eat the night incense. Lin Lang, you have been in the mansion for a long time. Can you tell me which one it is?" Lin Lang stared blankly. She had not expected that Jiang Wan would play catch words with her. It was just a perfunctory remark. How could there be any family rules? For a moment, she couldn't think of a reply and simply said, "Eldest young lady, this servant doesn't remember." This servant was just following Furen's instructions. Lin Lang's thinking of kicking the ball to Xia Yan was also very simple. It was nothing more than seeing that Jiang Wan was not in a good position to oppose Xia Yan. Today, she had stood up for Zhou Momo, and had probably already violated Xia Yan's taboo. However, since it had already been made clear that pretending to be deaf and mute would not work, if she did not blow up the matter, how could she end it? Xia Yan had started the game, but it was not up to her to end it. Jiang Wan smiled slightly, then, Lin Lang, what you mean is that Furen has committed a mistake, is that right? This servant does not mean that. Lin Lang was somewhat anxious, eldest young lady, why bother over a mere servant? Jiang Wan shook her head, what you have said is wrong. My Jiang family has a good reputation in the capital, and we cannot do things that confuse the public. Even if it is a servant, we cannot wrongly accuse or blame her. If she has committed a mistake, she must be punished strictly according to the family rules. Otherwise, how can we face justice? If anyone can be punished at will, wouldn't the Jiang Fu be in chaos? Therefore, this matter must be clarified. What does eldest young lady intend to do? Seeing Jiang Ruan's unyielding attitude, Lin Lang also sensed that something was amiss. She no longer pestered her, but her attitude was somewhat rude and unreasonable. Jiang Wan was just about to speak when she suddenly felt the body of the person in her embrace sink. Zhou Momo had actually fainted. Her face darkened. Baiji, bring Zhou Momo back to my courtyard, and immediately call for a physician. Eldest young lady, Lin Lang stood in front of her, this is unreasonable. She has not yet been punished, and she is also not a servant in eldest young lady's courtyard. I'm afraid that eldest young lady does not have this authority. Lin Lang, do you have the authority to stand in front of me? Jiang Wan said coldly, Baiji, hurry up and go. Lin Lang still wanted to stop her, but when she saw Jiang Ruan's cold expression, she could not help but stare blankly. She did not dare to say anything, and could only watch helplessly as Baiji supported Zhou Momo back to Wanju. Jiang Wan looked at her and said faintly, Lin Lang, there are some things that I do not have the authority to do, and I do not know whether Furen has the authority, but there is someone who definitely has the authority. Lin Lang stared at her blankly. Lin Lang, go and invite Furen, we will meet at Guilan Yuan. Guilan Yuan was the courtyard of the old Jiang madam, Jiang Quan's mother. Jiang Quan was born of the Jiang family's concubine, and after the concubine died, he was raised under the mother's name. Both of them could be considered a loving mother and a filial son, so the old Jiang madam's position in the Jiang Fu was unquestionable. In her previous life, Jiang Wan was not familiar with the old Jiang madam. Because Xia Yan and Jiang Su Su always said that this old Jiang madam had an eccentric temperament, she rarely got close to the old Jiang madam. In her memory, the old Jiang madam was a person who paid great attention to rules. Although she was not warm to Zhao Mei at first, after Jiang Quan married Xia Yan, he was always reluctant to leave Xia Yan's courtyard, and was severely reprimanded by the old Jiang madam. In her previous life, when she had reached the marriageable age, everyone had approved of her entering the palace in place of Jiang Su Su. Only the old Jiang madam had objected. However, at that time, her body was already withering and decaying, and she was bedridden, so no one listened to her. But now, there were still a few years before she reached the marriageable age, and it was the glorious period when the old Jiang madam was in charge of the Jiang Fu's affairs. However, she did not know whether Xia Yan's methods would be enough in front of the astute and powerful old Jiang madam when she was young. Guilan Yuan was located in the western part of the Jiang Fu, and it was the furthest from Jiang Wanju. The servant girl who had gone to report came back with the old Jiang madam's personal servant girl, Kai Quebec. When Kai Ke saw Jiang Wan, she was shocked. In the past, when Zhao Mei was still around, this most unfavored eldest young miss had been extremely distant from the old Jiang madam. How was it that she had come to the old Jiang madam's residence so soon after returning to the Fu? Jiang Wan smiled at her, Kai Ke Jijia, is Zumo still resting? The old madam has already woken up. Kai Ke put away the doubts in her heart and said amiably, Miss, please follow this servant. Jiang Wan joked with her as they walked, I was also afraid that I would disturb Zumo's rest. I did not expect that Zuma would be so energetic and wake up so early. This makes me feel very ashamed. As she said this, one of her feet had already stepped into the room, and a refreshing sandalwood fragrance slowly drifted over. Looking ahead, an old madam with a head full of silver hair was currently leaning against the couch with her eyes closed, her hand holding a string of prayer beads in meditation. Chapter 36. Beside the old Jiang madam, Du Wan looked at Jiang Wan and the others in astonishment. Kai Ke said softly, "Old madam, eldest miss is here." The old Jiang madam remained motionless, her eyes still closed. Lu Zhu was a little uneasy, but Jiang Wan did not express anything and remained standing in the same place. Kai Ke and Du Wan both stood quietly to one side. They did not speak, nor did they greet Jiang Wan. Instead, they allowed Jiang Wan to be ignored. Jiang Ruan's gaze was dull, and she quietly sized up the old madam. The old Jiang madam was somewhat different from what she remembered. At first, she had thought that the old Jiang madam was nothing more than an old-fashioned and harsh grandmother. Now, looking at her, there was not a single part of her body that was not rich and glorious. Her demeanor was serene, and there was a natural sharpness between her brows. Evidently, this woman who was chanting Buddhist scriptures was not as indifferent to everything as the Buddhist scriptures in her hand said. Time passed quietly, and the room was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping on the floor could be heard clearly. After an unknown amount of time, the old woman on the couch slowly opened her eyes and looked towards Jiang Wan. Jiang Wan returned the gaze with a serene expression, standing ramrod straight and respectful. The old Jiang madam narrowed her eyes and said indifferently, "Why didn't you call me when you came? What are you doing standing there like a rock?" "When I came in, I saw Zumu meditating." "When meditating, one must be single-minded, otherwise one's heart is not sincere." Jiang Wan did not dare to disturb Zumu. Jiang Wan smiled and said, "But I still disturbed you." The old Jiang madam leaned to the side, and Du Wan hurriedly served hot tea. The old Jiang madam took the tea and took a sip, then tilted her head to look at Jiang Wan and said, "You are a patient person. Compared to Zumu, I am far inferior." Jiang Wan humbly said, "Yesterday, I returned to the Fu in a hurry and did not come to see Zumu. It is Jiang Ruan's fault." The old Jiang madam said indifferently, "The matter of you returning to the Fu has caused an uproar in the capital. Yesterday, you must have been tired from dealing with it, so it was right that I did not come." The tone of these words was unclear, and the old madam's attitude was unclear. Jiang Wan thought for a moment and said, "No matter what, Zumu is still Zumu, you are still the old madam of the Jiang Fu, and Jiang Ruan's relative." Not having expected Jiang Wan to say this, the old Jiang madam was slightly surprised. Lowering her head, she took a sip of tea and said, "I have not seen you for a few years. Come forward, let me see you more clearly." Jiang Wan obeyed and stepped forward. Kai Ke and Du Wan stood to one side, and their gazes also began to size up Jiang Wan. The two of them had served Madame Dowager personally and knew her temperament. They knew what would happen today, but they did not expect it to be like this. There was no disgust or vulgarity. On the contrary, she was extremely calm. Her attitude was natural and unrestrained, without the slightest bit of timidity. He then looked at the girl who had walked a few steps forward. Her body was delicate and her back was perfectly straight. The sunlight shone on her bright and clean face, making her skin look even more white like jade. Her eyebrows were filled with affection, and a pair of watery eyes revealed a faint smile. There was a kind of gentle and firm feeling in them. Most importantly, as she stood in the room, she did not have the slightest trace of timidity and inexperience that a young girl should have. There was only a kind of settled steadiness, which made her bright and beautiful appearance appear noble and elegant. Kai Ke and Du Wan looked at each other and saw the astonishment in each other's eyes. This eldest miss had gone to the countryside to stay in the manor for a few years. How did she become so different? She seemed like a noble who had been carefully raised in the palace. Not only Du Wan and Kai Kei, but the old Jiang madam's gaze also became sluggish. Her sharp gaze bored down on Jiang Wan, but Jiang Ruan's expression did not change in the slightest. She continued to smile faintly as she looked at the old Jiang madam. The old Jiang madam moved her eyes away and said faintly, older by a few years, more matured. Her expression was cold and indifferent as she suppressed the trace of astonishment in the bottom of her heart. She had lived for most of her life and could be considered to have an accurate judgment of people. The Jiang Wan of today was like a completely different person from the past. Just that calmness alone was enough to cause Jiang Su to lose a great victory. However, she did not know what kind of opportunities Jiang Wan had encountered in the manner. At such a young age, her aura already had a compelling momentum. I'm afraid you didn't come here today just to see your grandmother, right? Is there something else? The old madam asked. Earlier, before Jiang Wan had arrived, a servant girl had already come to inform her of what had happened at the gates of Yan Huayuan. Jiang Wan had proposed to look for her to resolve this matter. The old Jiang madam was also very astonished, but immediately understood in her heart that this eldest girl had never been able to gain Jiang Quan's favor, and her stepmother was also not a kind person. If she wanted to rely on her maternal grandmother, this could only be the only way out. However, if she wanted to curry favor with her so that she could help Zhou Momo, she would not be willing. Before Jiang Wan could open her mouth, she heard a maidservant report from outside, Furen has arrived. Immediately after, a clear and melodious voice rang out, Zumo. Jiang Wan did not turn her head, only to see a figure dressed in white running past her. The figure climbed up to the old Jiang madam's couch in a familiar manner and snuggled up to her side like a kitten, happily saying, Zumo, look, I have brought your favorite almond cake. Finished speaking, as if presenting a treasure, the figure placed the straw basket in his hands on the table. Sun Yang, look at you, what are you going to do if you disturb grandmother? Xia Yan's voice sounded from behind her. Jiang Su pursed her lips, what does it matter, grandmother will not blame me. Pihu. The old Jiang madam reprimanded her, but a smile appeared on her face, you do not know the rules, in the future, when you marry, won't people laugh their heads off? What is grandmother saying? Jiang Su blushed and turned her head as if she had just discovered Jiang Wan. She exclaimed in surprise, the Jijia is also here. Jiang Wan smiled and nodded. Jiang Su looked at the old Jiang madam, and then looked at Jiang Wan. Suddenly, she said, Zumo, did you and the Jijia whisper something behind Su's back? Su also wants to listen. The Jijia, what did you two do just now? She blinked her eyes, which were as hazy as clouds and mist, full of intelligence and affection. Her captivating red mole was like a small flower, and her posture was innocent and pure, as if she was a fairy that had fallen into the mortal world. The old Jiang madam did not speak, and only faintly cast her gaze towards Jiang Wan. Kai Kei glanced at Jiang Wan with some worry. This room was bustling, but eldest Mist seemed to be alone. It was cold and cheerless, and there was not even anyone who could help or say a word. Xia Yan smiled, Sun Yang, don't talk nonsense, you're the Jijia. Without waiting for her to finish speaking, Jiang Wan sighed softly, and her voice was light and gentle as she slowly said, Sun Yang is wrong. Today, I have only come to see grandmother. Sun Yang, you also know that I have stayed in the rural residence for a whole 5 years, and it has also been 5 years since I and grandmother have seen each other. Buddhist scriptures stress on perfection, and I feel that nothing in the world is more perfect than a family reunion. I am not like you, Sun Yang, who can enjoy this kind of perfection at all times. For me, meeting today is the most perfect moment in these 5 years. I have not whispered anything to grandmother, I just wanted to see my relatives. Chapter 37. The room was strangely quiet. Jiang Wan calmly stood in the same spot with a faint smile on her face. However, her gaze seemed to penetrate a layer of sadness. Compared to Jiang Su's pitiful demeanor, her quietness made people want to probe deeper. Xia Yan's smile had already frozen on her face, and her hands, hidden in her sleeves, were tightly clenched into fists. Jiang Ruan's words did not seem to be a big deal, but she calmly criticized Jiang Su's rudeness. Who could make things difficult for a girl who had just returned home and longed for affection? Sure enough, she saw the old Jiang madam's gaze soften as she looked at Jiang Ruan. Before Jiang Su could react, she heard the old Jiang madam's displeased voice ring out, "Sun Yang, your Dejijia has just returned home. It is only right and proper for her to visit me, her grandmother. You are not allowed to cause trouble." Jiang Su was momentarily stunned. It was true that her words just now had been deliberately directed at Jiang Ruan, but she was also certain that the old Jiang madam would not blame her. All these years, she had been obedient and sensible, and the old Jiang madam had doted on her dearly. However, today was the first time that the old Jiang madam had gotten angry at her. In the end, she was still young, so Jiang Su managed to cover it up with some difficulty. She smiled and said, "I'm sorry, eldest sister. Su didn't do it on purpose. Eldest sister, don't be angry, okay? You and I are sisters, how could I be angry?" Jiang Ruan replied gently. The old Jiang madam was even more satisfied and said, "You two sisters must support each other more. Eldest girl has done very well today." Xia Yan smiled as she stepped forward. "Wan Yang is naturally a good person. However, Wan Yang, I heard that Lin Lang had angered you today. It seems that it was because of a servant, yet you still want old Furen to stand up for you. What is going on?" Jiang Su was still nestled beside the old Jiang madam, but her posture was not as natural as when she had first entered the room. The old Jiang madam also looked towards her, obviously waiting for her to say something. Jiang Ruan then tirelessly recounted the sequence of events that had transpired outside Yanhua Yuan. Her tone of voice was steady, and she even repeated her conversation with Lin Lang without missing a single word. She did not embellish her story, making it even more convincing. Finished speaking, she looked at the old Jiang madam. "Old madam, when mother passed away, I was bedridden. I only heard that Zhou Momo had left the Fu, but I did not expect to see her today. It must have been one of the daring maids who said the wrong thing. It's just that I don't know, Nanny Zhou is my wet nurse, how did she end up like this?" Xia Yan sighed softly. "Wan Yang, you are still young, and there are some things that I do not wish to tell you. Actually, when Jiejie passed away, Zhou Momo did not leave the Fu, but rather stole Jiejie's jewelry and prepared to leave. The Jiang Fu cannot tolerate servants with dirty hands and feet. Moreover, Zhou Momo was your wet nurse. I was afraid that your illness would worsen due to your sadness and disappointment, so I discussed it with Leoi and decided to first punish Zhou Momo, and did not tell you." Xia Yan looked at her with sincerity. "Now that I've taught you, mother apologizes to you. It's just that this servant deserves to be punished. Even if you misunderstand me, I will not regret my initial decision." Kai Ke and Du Wan lowered their heads and listened quietly as they did not have the right to speak here. However, they were secretly thinking that the madam's words were indeed watertight. After her speech, the eldest young lady had nothing else to say. Jiang Wan shook her head. "Although mother dealt with the servants of Mei Qing Yuan on your own, and did not inform me in these 5 years, it was all for my sake. How could I blame mother?" Xia Yan's expression was somewhat unsightly, but when she saw that Jiang Ruan's expression was even more sincere than hers, as if she had not noticed the hidden sarcasm in her words, she felt even more stifled in her heart. Jiang Ruan continued, "However, there is still one thing that I do not understand, and that is, for a servant who steals their master's money and jewelry, it does not seem that they should be punished with such things as gouging out their eyes and eating night incense. The Jiang family is also considered a scholarly family, how could they do such a bloody thing? Gouging out their eyes and eating night incense. Old Jiang Madam frowned, what's going on? She was a person who prayed to Buddha and had her own opinions on certain matters. She had always turned a blind eye to Xia Yan's methods. She knew that Xia Yan was not a person who was easy to deal with, but she was not like this matron, who usually spoke softly and slowly, who could be so vicious towards a defenseless wet nurse. This had already touched her bottom line. Xia Yan's voice was still gentle, it's not like that. Because Zhou Momo is Ruan Yang's wet nurse, I did not have the heart to punish her too harshly, so I sent her to the washroom. Who knew that Zhou Momo would still have the habit of stealing in the washroom? She quarreled with the other servants of the washroom, and her eyes were gouged out. The washroom could no longer tolerate her, and she could only do the work of removing night incense. So that's how it is, Jiang Wan said thoughtfully, where is the person who gouged out Zhou Momo's eyes now? They have already been beaten and expelled from the Fu. Xia Yan said, as for eating night incense, that was that girl Lin Lang's own idea. I have already ruthlessly taught her a lesson. With this series of actions, it appeared that she was virtuous and considerate, and that she also took the overall situation into consideration. There was not a single aspect that was not right, it was all Jiang Ruan's fault. Jiang Ruan smiled faintly, Mother is truly kind. If it were me, I would not have done any better. However, since Zhou Momo's crime is not to this extent, and now that I have returned, she can still be considered as my Mei Qin Yuan, no, Wan Ju's person. Can Mother make the decision and grant Wan Yang's request? Without waiting for Xia Yan to speak, Jiang Su had already called out, Dejijia, you want Zhou Momo to return to your courtyard, aren't you afraid that she will steal things? Wan Yang, I know that you are a kind-hearted child, but Zhou Momo's moral character is indeed not suitable to accompany you. Moreover, she is blind, and in Wan Ju, she would only be an idler. Could it be that you want to raise a servant to serve you? Wouldn't the Jiang Fu become a joke? Doesn't old Madam also think so? That's right. Old Jiang Madam nodded. Jiang Wan said, it is precisely for the Jiang Fu that I am doing this. The Jiang Fu has always been clear about right and wrong, and their conduct is also extremely disciplined. Now, Zhou Momo, a perfectly fine person, has had her eyes gouged out under everyone's noses. Next time, will it be someone else? Will it be more than just a pair of eyes? If this gets out, how will everyone view our Jiang Fu? They will only say that the Jiang Fu is in a mess, and that Mother has not managed the household well. If Zhou Momo's hands and feet are really unclean in Ruanju, I will be the first to send her to the yamen. If she can turn over a new leaf, it can be considered as fulfilling the fate of master and servant. Moreover, it is not that a blind person cannot do anything. In this world, there are many things that are born blind, but they still live well, don't they? Seeing that the old Jiang Madam's expression had somewhat loosened, and listening to the overt and covert mockery of her having not managed the household well, Xia Yan frowned, but this does not make sense. Mother, Jiang Wan interrupted her words, and indifferently said, everything has a cause and effect. Even if it is for the sake of good karma in the next life, it is best not to increase evil karma in this life. Chapter 38. The old Jiang Madam had always believed in Buddhism. After hearing Jiang Ruan's words, she said, eldest girl is right, the Jiang Fu is not without consideration for others' feelings. Someone's eyes were gouged out right under your nose. In the end, it is your fault as the housekeeper's wife. Since she is only a servant, there is no harm in placing her in the courtyard. In any case, she is her person, and she can do as she pleases. Jiang Wan smiled, thank you, Zumu. Xia Yan stared blankly for a moment, then quickly smiled and said, since Mother has said so, it would not be good for me to be meddlesome. However, what does Ruan Yang want her to do after bringing her into the courtyard? Is it also to arrange for night incense to be poured? Jiang Wan laughed in spite of herself. Mother worries too much. Zhou Momo is now Wanju's person, so she will continue to serve as a Momo. Xia Yan's gaze flickered. Wan Yang, you are an unmarried woman. If the Momo serving you is blind, it would not be good for outsiders to see. Why not? Jiang Wan said, in this world, not everything is based on appearances. All right. The old Jiang madam seemed to be impatient. Eldest girl is still young and does not need any face. It is fine as long as the servants are comfortable. It is still too early to worry about this. She looked at Jiang Ruan's appearance and frowned. In a few days, Assistant Minister Shen's Furen is having a birthday celebration and has invited the Jiang Fu's young ladies. As a mother, you should not only care about the matters of the courtyard. It is more important to buy some new clothes for eldest girl as soon as possible. Take a look at what eldest girl is wearing now. If others see it, they may say that our Jiang Fu is treating the D daughter harshly. Ever since Jiang Wan had returned to the Fu, she had changed her clothes. She was still wearing a dark green lined jacket. Although her appearance was bright and beautiful, even her old clothes seemed to have gained some color. When compared to Jiang Su, it was immediately obvious who was superior. Jiang Su's clothes were mostly white, and the decorations were extremely simple. At first glance, she looked simple and elegant. However, upon closer inspection, the materials used were all expensive silk and satin, and the embroidery on them were all top-notch. Although there were not many jewelry, the few simple pieces were worth a lot of money. At first glance, one could tell that a noble family had meticulously raised a good young lady with a refined temperament. Ruan girls' teachings are actually inferior to Li girls. As the D mother, you should also pay attention, the old Jiang madam lectured. Xia Yan said guiltily, it's all your daughter-in-law's fault. These few days, Wan Yang will be coming back, and your daughter-in-law has forgotten about the Jiang Fu's affairs. Later, your daughter-in-law will ask the tailor of Rui Lu to come over and take Wan Yang's measurements to make some new clothes. As the D daughter of the Jiang Fu, how can she not be stylish? Not only did these few words indicate that she had worked hard for the Jiang Fu over the past few days, but she also said that she would immediately hire a tailor. Being able to see the big picture and admit that she had made a mistake, the old Jiang madam's expression softened considerably. After a few more words of admonishment, Jiang Wan and the others left the room. Jiang Su called out to Jiang Wan at the door, "Dejijia, don't you want to go to Su's courtyard for a while?" Jiang Wan replied, "Another day, there are still some things that have not been properly packed. Does eldest sister not like me?" Jiang Su was somewhat at a loss. Did Su do something wrong? How could this be? Jiang Ruan's expression was somewhat astonished, and her tone became increasingly gentle. "I am your eldest D sister, and you are my younger sister. How could I not like you? Don't think too much." Jiang Su's expression was sluggish for a moment before she raised her head and said, "If eldest sister says so, then I am relieved. In a few days, when we go to Miss Shen's Fu, I will also take good care of eldest sister." After Jiang Su left, Lu Zhu looked at her back before saying, "Miss, why does second miss feel so strange?" "What's strange?" Jiang Wan asked. Lu Zhu thought for a moment. "I don't know, but I just feel that she and Furen's temperament is a little too good. Just now, Miss was like that. If it were anyone else, they would have been angry, but second Miss and Furen were all smiles and very amiable. How can there be such people in this world? Even a clay figurine has 3 parts of its soil." Jiang Wan smiled slightly. Xia Yan was educated and reasonable, while Jiang Su was elegant and refined. Both of their reputations were their burdens. It was destined that for the sake of their own noble appearances, they would not do anything that would be beneath their status, and would always be generous and appropriate in front of outsiders. Just now, she had repeatedly emphasized her status as the eldest D daughter. She wondered how hard it was for Jiang Su to hold it in. However, this was only the beginning. Xia Yan's movements were also fast. In the afternoon, the tailor of Rui Lu arrived at Wanju. The tailor of Rui Lu was a young woman named Lu Rui. Rui Lu was considered one of the best ready-made clothing stores in the capital. It specialized in making clothes for the young ladies of the capital's aristocratic families. Some time ago, the matter of the Jiang family's young lady had caused an uproar in the capital. Lu Rui was also very curious about this Jiang family's young lady. When she arrived at Wanju, she saw the two large words on the signboard at the courtyard's entrance, Wanju. It was truly imposing. The handwriting was elegant and unrestrained, like a sharp sword that had not been unsheathed, containing a faint sharpness. Lu Rui usually did business for wealthy families, so she was quite knowledgeable about the four treasures of the study. At this moment, when she saw this piece of calligraphy, she could not help but sigh in admiration. Ever since she had come to the capital to praise the eighth prince's elegant and unrestrained handwriting, she felt that the words on this signboard were not inferior. Lian Xiao, who was leading the way, saw that Lu Rui kept staring at the signboard at the courtyard's entrance. She smiled and said, "This was written by my young lady." Lu Rui smiled and said, "Good handwriting." It was said that seeing the handwriting was like seeing the person. Lu Rui also had a good impression of this Jiang family's young lady, who she had never met before. After entering the room, Lian Xiao said, "Young lady, Lu Gugu of Rui Lu has arrived." Jiang Wan put down the book in her hands and looked up. Lu Rui was stunned for a moment. Even though she had seen countless beauties in the past few years, she could not help but be startled when she saw Jiang Wan. Jiang Wan must have been tired from reading earlier. Her whole body leaned against the soft couch, as if her whole body had softly sunk in. When she looked up, there was a trace of unconsciously languid indolence. However, in her upturned charming eyes, there was a trace of coldness that had not yet been restrained. She was like a cold and elegant rose, with a kind of cool allure. She smiled at Lu Rui, and in an instant, the coldness disappeared. She was as warm and beautiful as spring water. Lu Gugu. Lu Rui also put away the amazement in her heart. She smiled and said, "I have come to make clothes for Miss Jiang. Here are a few bolts of satin. Miss Jiang can choose one first." There were several batches of satin on the table, all of them made of high-quality silver thread. The colors were clear after rain, fragrant autumn, honey peach, bright pink, and light yellow. All of these were the colors that young women liked. The few bolts of satin that Xia Yan had specially chosen for her were all bright and vibrant in color. It was impossible to pick out any flaws. However, if she were to wear such clothes, she would definitely become Jiang Su's foil. This was because the brighter the color, the more Jiang Su's white clothes would seem like a fluttering fairy. Jiang Wan pointed to a bolt of bright red satin in the middle and said, "That one." Chapter 39. Lu Rui looked at Jiang Wan with some astonishment, as if she had not expected her to choose such a brightest piece of satin. She thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "Eldest Jiang Mrs. skin is naturally fair, and this red suits you very well." Jiang Wan smiled and said, "Shopkeeper Lu, Sun Yang must have chosen white satin." "That's right, second Jiang Miss has always liked plain and clean clothes." At this point, Lu Rui suddenly understood. When she looked at Jiang Wan again, her gaze was different. Everyone in the capital says that second Jiang Miss is incomparably elegant, like a fairy. Now that I look at it, eldest Miss is the queen of beauties. Lu Rui sighed in her heart. This eldest Jiang Miss was born with an exquisite heart. Originally, bright colors would be gaudy in Jiang Su's simple elegance, but if it was replaced with a fiery red, and if the person wearing the clothes was naturally not ordinary, it would not be easy to suppress the limelight. Second Jiang Miss wanted to be the focus of everyone, but she did not know that she had quietly become a foil for others. Lu Rui was a straightforward person, and in addition to her previous favorable impression of Jiang Yuan, she now admired her even more. She said, "Eldest miss, please be at ease. When the time comes, the clothes from Rui Lu will definitely satisfy eldest Mississippi. When you go out, you will definitely be the most eye-catching one." Jiang Yuan also smiled and said, "Many thanks, shopkeeper Lu." A few days later, the clothes from Rui brothel were delivered to him. Because the clothes were made for the young ladies of the Jiang family, they were all placed in old Jiang Madam's Guilan Yuan. By the time Jiang Yuan and Lien Qiao arrived at Guilan Yuan, Jiang Su Su was already there. When she saw Jiang Yuan, she smiled and said, "Is eldest sister also here to look at the clothes?" Jiang Yuan nodded, only to hear Jiang Su Su say, "It's just a few pieces of clothes. Zumo insists on letting the sisters gather together. Every time, it's the same, and the clothes are also the same. What's there to look at?" She spoke naively and romantically. She had the appearance of a fairy, but she had no interest in jewelry or clothes, and there was not a trace of the mortal world. Such a woman didn't seem to belong to the world of mortals. She was born to be protected in the palm of someone's hand and live an innocent life. In her previous life, Jiang Su Su's name had spread throughout the capital, but she was not like other women who coveted fame and wealth. There was not a single person in the world who did not praise her. Jiang Yuan had also once thought that this younger sister of hers did not understand these worldly affairs. It was not until the last moment of her previous life that she understood that it was not that Jiang Su Su did not have any desires, and it was not that she had abandoned the fame and wealth of this world like a pair of worn-out shoes. Rather, what she wanted had always been the highest position, and everything else was beneath contempt. In this life, Jiang Su Su was still young, but he didn't know if she had that kind of willpower now. When the old Jiang madam heard Jiang Su Su's words, she jokingly scolded, "Which young lady doesn't like to dress up? You, on the other hand, are so plain and clean like a little girl all day long. You're already at the age of a flower, yet you don't like to wear bright colors." Although she said this, the old Jiang madam's eyes were filled with satisfaction. Obviously, she also thought that Jiang Su Su's plain and clean clothes made her appear more refined. Jiang Su Su frowned, "I don't like those things. I heard that the Jijia asked for red satin, is that true?" Jiang Yuan nodded, "Yes, now that the new year has just passed, I want to wear something more festive." This reason was understandable, so Jiang Su Su couldn't say anything more. While they were waiting, Jiang Li and Jiang Dan walked in one after the other. The two of them bowed to the old Jiang madam and stood to one side. In front of the old Jiang madam, Jiang Li could still be considered well-behaved. Apart from her somewhat arrogant gaze when facing Jiang Yuan, she could not find a single flaw in her behavior. Jiang Dan's expression was timid, and she somewhat helplessly held on to the hem of her clothes, as if she was very uncomfortable with the situation of everyone gathered together. After a while, Kai Kei, who was by the old Jiang madam's side, walked in with a chest in her hands. She smiled and said, "Shopkeeper Lu of Rui Lu said that these 4 pieces of clothing will be produced first. After a few days, the spring clothes will be produced, and at that time, eldest miss will be able to pick some materials." Among the 4 young ladies of the Jiangfu, Jiang Yuan had the fewest clothes, and they were all old clothes that had been brought over from the rural residence. Naturally, the old Jiang madam would not allow her to wear such clothes out of the house. First, she had gone to a tailor shop to buy some new clothes, and when the weather was better, the clothes for the 4 seasons of spring, summer, autumn, and winter would have to be remade. Jiang Li's gaze paused, and she fiercely glared at Jiang Yuan. The dissatisfaction on her face was very obvious, but due to the old madam's presence, she did not say anything in the end. Kai Kei opened a small chest. "Young ladies, come and pick." The clothes were all neatly folded and placed in the exquisite wooden chest specially made by Rui Lu. Jiang Su Su glanced at Jiang Yuan, "De Jijia, you can choose first." Jiang Yuan shook her head, "I am the eldest, Dan Nyang, you can choose first. Kai Ke said with a smile, these are all ready-made clothes, it is the same to choose sooner or later. As she said this, Jiang Su Su became embarrassed and said, that's true, then I will choose first. What Jiang Su Su took out from the chest was indeed a snow-white fragrant fox fur coat with embroidered edges. At the waist was a palace white embroidered brocade skirt, and on the outside was a silver mouse waistcoat. The style was exquisite and unique, but it did not appear cumbersome, yet it exuded nobility. Even if Jiang Su Su wanted to show that she did not care about the clothes, when she saw the ready-made clothes, she could not help but reveal a trace of a smile. When Jiang Li saw Jiang Su Su's clothes, a trace of unhappiness flashed in her eyes. However, the clothes of the Di daughter of the Jiang Fu had been made with more effort than the clothes of the Shu daughters. Moreover, Jiang Su Su was so doted on, so even if she was unwilling, Jiang Li did not dare to say anything. Jiang Li's clothes were a light purple embroidered, narrow silver jacket, paired with a lotus green crepe skirt, and gold plate buttons, which made her look very attractive. On the other hand, Jiang Dan's clothes were a camellia yellow, tight-fitting cotton-padded jacket, and an onion yellow silk cotton-padded skirt. It was simple and bright, but it greatly complemented Jiang Dan's timid and lovable temperament. Jiang Li and Jiang Dan's clothes were actually very beautiful, but compared to Jiang Su Su's, they were probably inferior. If the three of them stood together, in the eyes of outsiders, they would only see Jiang Su Su's elegant and refined charm. Jiang Li was also aware of this point, so when she saw the clothes, she did not seem happy. Jiang Dan, on the other hand, was extremely happy, and her eyes were full of joy. Jiang Ruan's clothes were at the bottom, so Kai Ke helped her take them out and shake them open. They saw a bright red, narrow silver jacket, embroidered with hundreds of butterflies and flowers, a jadeite, flowery satin skirt, and a pair of fragrant goatskin boots with gold pinched into the clouds. When everyone saw clearly, Jiang Su Su cried out in surprise, it's actually so bright. Although young ladies liked brightly colored clothes, they were more willing to wear soft and beautiful pink and peach colors, and rarely tried this kind of watery red. Firstly, it was because watery red clothes were mostly suitable for those women with fiery temperaments. If a gentle woman wore red, it would always feel that something was missing. Secondly, in this Fu, Jiang Su Su liked white the most, so wearing red next to her would definitely create a strong contrast. Jiang Li and Jiang Dan's beauty were not as good as Jiang Su Su's. If they had chosen red, standing next to Jiang Su Su, they would definitely have made a complete fool of themselves. However, Jiang Ruan had chosen such a warm and fiery red. Chapter 40. Jiang Li laughed, why did big sister choose a completely different color from second sister? Now that the two of them are standing side by side, interesting. Jiang Su Su stared blankly for a moment, then smiled and said, the Jijia will definitely look better in red than Sun Yang. It's also very festive. Although she knew that Jiang Ruan had chosen a bolt of red satin, she had not expected that Rui Lu would make such a complicated and gorgeous dress. However, this somewhat comforted her heart. A young girl would certainly not be able to suppress such a gorgeous and complicated red dress. Even if Jiang Ruan's appearance was bright and beautiful, when she wore this dress, she would only be suppressed by the momentum of the dress. Instead, she would appear somewhat top-heavy and very tacky. Jiang Li had the same thoughts as Jiang Ruan. She looked at Jiang Ruan with a hint of schadenfreude in her eyes, but her mouth said, shopkeeper Lu is really biased. The embroidery on the Jiejia's dress is so gorgeous, we can't compare. Only big sister would dare to wear this flower-like dress. Since I'm the eldest daughter of the Jiang Fu, it's better for me to dress more conventionally. Jiang Ruan smiled faintly, the clothes that you have chosen also suit you very well. All the young ladies in the Jiang Fu are the best. Jiang Dan glanced at Jiang Ruan and whispered, the Jiejia's clothes are really beautiful. I have never seen anyone in the Fu dressed like this. The old Jiang madam, who was seated, slightly narrowed her eyes and stared meaningfully at Jiang Ruan as she said, "The clothes are not bad, but there is still something missing. The eldest girl does not seem to have a cloak. Du Wan, when you return, retrieve that crimson crane cloak from my chest and send it to Ruanju." The crimson crane cloak had originally been part of the old Jiang madam's dowry, so it was naturally incomparably precious. However, Jiang Su had always liked the solemn white color, so she had never asked for it. However, this did not mean that she did not like it. Now that she saw that the old Jiang madam had gifted her own dowry to Jiang Ruan, she was astonished. Jiang Li's eyes had long since turned red, and she said sourly, "Zuma really dotes on Dejijia, giving such a good thing to her as soon as she returned." The old Jiang madam glanced at her, her tone of voice indistinguishable from joy or anger. "You have all been raised in the Jiang Fu, have your clothes and uses been short? The eldest girl has just come back and suffered a lot at the manor in the past few years. Look at her, she doesn't even have any decent jewelry on her." Jiang Su thought for a moment, then said, "Grandmother is right. Dejijia, I still have a lot of jewelry at my place. Why don't you come to my courtyard to sit and choose some jewelry before leaving? It's just that my jewelry is too plain, I don't know if you'll like it." Jiang Li couldn't be as generous as Jiang Su. Even if she wanted to pretend, she couldn't do it, so she simply turned her head to the side and pretended not to hear. Jiang Dan lowered her head and clutched the corner of her clothes tightly. She did not have as many jewelry as her two sisters. At most, the jewelry would be bestowed by Madame during the New Year and other festivals. Usually, she would accumulate them and pawn them off if she needed them urgently in the future. "How can I take younger sister's things?" Jiang Ruan said, "It's all right, mother will definitely have it prepared for me." The old Jiang madam's eyes flashed and she waved her hand, "Fine, all of you have received your clothes. Tomorrow when you go to Assistant Minister Shen's residence, you must dress up decently. My Jiang Fu's daughters are all well-bred young ladies from prestigious families. Second girl, your older sister has just returned to the capital and is not familiar with many people there. Tomorrow, you must take good care of her. When you are outside, all of you represent the Jiang Fu's reputation, so you must support each other." Jiang Su nodded, "Zumo is right, Sun Yang understands." Jiang Ruan also nodded in agreement. After speaking for a while, the old Jiang madam was about to meditate, so they each took their finished clothes and returned to the courtyard. In the end, Jiang Ruan did not go to Jiang Su's courtyard to pick out jewelry. Instead, she heard that Jiang Li had gone and taken some necklaces and hairpins. Jiang Su was not stingy towards Jiang Li when it came to jewelry. Perhaps it was because Jiang Quan had never been short of her. When night fell, the old Jiang madam's personal maid, Kai Kei, delivered a crimson crane cloak. At the same time, she also brought a box of jewelry. She said that it had been bestowed by the old Jiang madam and instructed Jiang Ruan to dress up decently tomorrow. Jiang Ruan did not decline and smiled in agreement. Then, she picked out a silver hairpin of average quality from the box and gave it to Kai Kei, thanking her for making the trip. At first, Kai Kei was unwilling to accept it, but in the end, she could not refuse and could only accept it with a smile. After Kai Kei left, Lien Xiao said, "Now that the old madam is treating Miss so well, Mrs. Days can be considered to have ended and sweet has begun. This crimson crane cloak is very precious. For the old madam to give it to Miss just like that, it can be seen that the old madam's heart still dotes on our Mississippi." Bai Ji was also delighted. As she folded the crane cloak, she carefully examined the raw materials on top. Lu Zhu shook her head, "I don't think so. Now that Miss has just returned to the Fu, the old madam wants Miss to dress decently and go to Assistant Minister Shen's house. Tomorrow's gathering will be attended by the noble young ladies of the capital. Our Miss has not returned to the capital for 5 years. This time, when she makes an appearance, she must let everyone know that the eldest Miss of the Jiang Fu is a proper beauty from a prestigious family. I reckon that this is the old madam's intention. Jiang Yuan flicked the lamp wick. Lu Zhu is right, this is the advantage of the title of eldest miss of the Jiangfu. Keep that box well, I'm afraid that tomorrow will not be so relaxing. In Guilan Yuan, Zhang Mama got up and served the old madam a cup of red dates and lotus seeds tea. The old Jiang madam took the tea but did not drink it. She only looked thoughtfully at the red dates in the teacup. Zhang Mama, what do you think of the eldest girl? Zhang Mama smiled. Eldest miss was born beautiful, and now, her speech and mannerisms are also extremely graceful. It's just that her life is a little bitter, and Furen passed away early. She is an intelligent one, the old Jiang madam frowned. When she first returned to the Fu to see me, you did not see it. This girl's manner are actually like that of a noble from the palace. In the past, she was timid and docile, but now her temperament has changed, and she is not like her biological mother. It's just that all these years, she has been in the rural residence. It's not like you don't know about the things that Xia Yan has done, so how could there be any good fruit for the eldest girl to eat? It's already good that she hasn't been raised into a cripple. How did she manage to achieve what she has today? Perhaps it's the same as you. Kai K, who was at the side, heard this and smiled. After all, she is your grandson. Back then, old madam was one of the top young ladies in the capital. Who didn't say that you were well-behaved, talented, and good-looking? Eldest miss seems to be transparent, or perhaps she was born this way. Even in the rural residence, she can still have the bearing of one in the palace. You have a sweet mouth, the old Jiang madam scolded jokingly. I don't know what benefits that girl has promised you to actually speak up for her like this. I am not flattering eldest miss, I am trying to curry favor with the old madam, Kai K retorted. Zhang Mama also laughed. Old madam, don't worry so much. It is a good thing that eldest miss understands the rules. I think that she is one of the best young ladies in the capital. With such a person, the Jiangfu can hold its head up high. The old Jiang madam nodded. I only hope that she can do better tomorrow. Chapter 41. The next morning, Lian Xiao woke Jiang Yuan up early. Jiang Yuan instructed by Ji to take care of Zhou Momo, so today, Lu Zhu and Lian Xiao accompanied her. After Lu Zhu served Jiang Yuan breakfast, Lian Xiao could not wait to help Jiang Yuan change her clothes. Lu Zhu laughed. Lian Xiao Jijie is so anxious, those who don't know would think that today's guest is Lian Xiao Jijie. Stupid hussy, stop spouting nonsense. See if I don't tear your mouth apart. Lian Xiao said, how many days has it been since our miss dressed up properly? I have long said that our miss is a beauty. Just thinking of the eyeballs that will fall off when our miss goes out, I can't help but be very happy. Jiang Yuan laughed. The beauty in the Jiangfu is not me. Miss, are you talking about second miss? Lian Xiao was a straightforward person and said without a care, second miss appearance is good, but it is too light. It is fine now that you are younger, but if you get older, it will be somewhat boring if you continue to be so plain. How can she be as attractive as our miss? Jiang Yuan laughed in spite of herself. Do you know that the current trend in the capital is this kind of elegant and refined beauty? Someone like me is too gaudy. Lu Zhu, who was tidying up the things on the table, could not help but say, Miss, you are wrong. Scholars and poets all say that they love lotuses that grow out of the mud without being tainted, but the people of the world often spend a lot of money for a pot of Luoyang peony. Who would spend a lot of money for a pot of lotus in a pond? Lian Xiao nodded, exactly. Jiang Yuan shook her head and said no more. After Lu Zhu finished washing her hands, she had Jiang Yuan sit in front of the dressing table. Miss, what kind of hair do you want to comb? Up to you. Jiang Yuan said, as long as it is not rude. After going around in circles, the time it takes to burn a stick of incense passed. The carriages outside the Jiangfu had already been prepared. There were 2 carriages, one for Jiang Su Su, Jiang Yuan and Xia Yan, and the other for Jiang Dan and Jiang Li. The two carriages had to set off together for the Shenfu. Assistant Minister Shen and Jiang Quan had always had a good relationship in the officialdom. When Lian Xiao and Lu Zhu followed Jiang Wan out the door, they could see from afar that Jiang Li and Jiang Dan had already arrived. The two of them were standing beside Xia Yan and talking to Jiang Su Su. Jiang Li was the first to see Jiang Wan and said with a smile, "The Jijia has such a great reputation, to actually make mother and sisters wait for so long." "It's Jiang Ruan's fault," Jiang Wan said with a smile, "after all, it's the first time I've entered the Shenfu since my return. I looked for the Momo in the courtyard to ask about some things, so that when the time comes, I wouldn't be lacking in etiquette and others would only say that our Jiangfu's people don't understand the rules." Xia Yan smiled amiably. "What's the point of saying all this? Ruan Yang's attire today really makes it hard for people to recognize her. She's so beautiful." At the same time, Jiang Li and Jiang Su Su's eyes shone with a strange light. Embroidered with 100 butterflies and adorned with flowers, a bright red satin jacket, a jadeite floral satin skirt, and a pair of fragrant red sheepskin boots with gold pinched into the clouds. Originally, they had thought that Jiang Wan would not be able to suppress this kind of attire and would only make her look inferior. Who would have thought that Jiang Wan would be so compatible with this attire, as if this attire had been made for her? There was not the slightest trace of restraint. Instead, that incomparably warm red color exuded a kind of nobility and calmness, and then flowed with a faint charm, causing people to be unable to help but stare blankly. Everyone present only felt that this beauty was overbearing, and in front of them, this eldest young miss who was bullied and humiliated by others, was already a complete stranger. Jiang Wan said with a smile, "These younger sisters are also very beautiful. Mother's words really do not flatter me." After this warm and affectionate conversation, the few of them each boarded their own carriages. After Jiang Su Su boarded the carriage, she nestled in Xia Yan's embrace, watching Jiang Wan out of the corner of her eye. She had originally thought that with the three of them squeezed in the same carriage, Jiang Wan would definitely feel uncomfortable. Who would have thought that when Jiang Wan boarded the carriage, she would hold a travel book in her hands and read it, her gaze peaceful. This caused Jiang Su Su, who had wanted to speak, to be unable to say anything. The journey was peaceful, and after an unknown amount of time, the carriage stopped in front of the Shenfu. The few of them alighted from the carriage, and the manservant leading the way at the Shenfu's entrance came out to welcome them. Xia Yan handed over an invitation, and very quickly, a stout old mama walked out from the door and said with a smile, "Jiang Furen has arrived, our Furen has been waiting for you for a long time." Xia Yan smiled in response, and after walking for a while, she was led into the hall. As expected, Shen Furen was already waiting with tea. When she saw Xia Yan, her expression was extremely affectionate, and she said, "Jijia has not come often these days. If it were not for my birthday, I am afraid that I would have been anxiously waiting for you to come." Xia Yan also smiled. "These days, Wan Yang has just returned, and has been busy taking care of everything. Don't blame me." Shen Furen then turned her head, and a pair of astute eyes fixed on Jiang Wan. A trace of amazement flashed through them. "This must be eldest Jiang Miss, right? You are truly a beauty." Jiang Wan stepped forward to pay her respects. Even after hearing Shen Furen's somewhat presumptuous words, she was still unperturbed, and said in a natural and unrestrained manner, "Shen Furen praises me too much." Shen Furen's gaze seemed to be sizing up an object, and Lian Xiao and Lu Zhu, who were following beside her, were dissatisfied. Without batting an eyelid, they moved sideways to block Shen Furen's probing gaze. A trace of resentment flashed through Jiang Li's eyes, and she unwillingly stepped forward and smiled sweetly at Shen Furen. "Greetings, Furen." However, Shen Furen's attitude towards Jiang Li was very cold, and she only responded with a sound of acknowledgement before looking at Jiang Su Su and saying with a smile, "Sun Yang has become more and more adorable these days. You look like a little fairy, and it makes my eyes turn red with jealousy." "Mother, what jealousy are you talking about?" Just as she finished speaking, a delicate voice was heard from outside, and a young girl dressed in pink walked out. Upon seeing Jiang Su, she rushed over excitedly, "Su, Jie." Jiang Su smiled and held her hand, "Mingzhen Mimi." Shen Mingzhen was the apple of Assistant Minister Shen's eye. Assistant Minister Shen had 3 sons, but only 1 daughter. In her previous life, Jiang Ruan's impression of Shen Mingzhen was that she was Jiang Su's best friend, but she did not know why she was always full of hostility towards her. Every time she had a conflict with Shen Mingzhen, it was always Jiang Su who helped her out. At that time, Jiang Ruan had said that she was a good-for-nothing beauty who only knew how to dance and play the zither like a vulgar dancer. In her previous life, Jiang Ruan did not understand why Shen Mingzhen insisted on opposing her, even though she had not provoked Shen Mingzhen. Now that she thought about it, it was completely clear. In her previous life, on the road filled with enemies, separated by the distance between life and death, when she saw this old friend again, time seemed to flow, returning to a time when everything had not happened. She did not know what Shen Mingzhen's ending would be in this life. As if feeling her gaze, Shen Mingzhen turned her head, and when she saw Jiang Ruan's appearance, she was startled at first, but then, without rhyme or reason, she asked angrily, "Who is she?" Before the people around them could speak, they saw Jiang Ruan smile, and an indistinct trace of emotion flowed out from the corners of her eyes. She said indifferently, "Jiang family, Ruan Yang." Chapter 42. This was the first time such a scene had occurred. In her previous life, whenever a young lady from a noble family opposed Jiang Ruan, as long as Jiang Su was present, she would definitely help her out of the predicament. Perhaps it was to win her trust, or perhaps it was to win a good reputation. But now, she was not even willing to say a word of praise. Could it be that she was unable to keep her cool? It is enough for the Jiang Fu to have the second Jiang Mississippi. The second Jiang Miss is a talented woman in the capital. A woman in the wilderness is bound to be incomparably rough, not to mention her appearance. The young lady behind Jiang Su walked forward at a moderate pace. Like a ball of fire in the snow, or a plum branch in the frost and snow, she immediately attracted everyone's attention. Embroidered with gold and 100 butterflies, she wore a narrow, bright red satin coat, a jadeite satin skirt, and a pair of fragrant red sheepskin boots. This attire was already very rich, but on this young lady, it was as if she was born rich. The white fox fur peeking out from the sleeves of the big red crane glowed with a little silver light. It was full of vitality and radiated brilliance. "You are Jiang Ruan." Shen Mingzhen was stunned. She had long heard about Jiang Ruan's matter. She and Jiang Su had always been on good terms. Jiang Su was beautiful and refined, but her temperament was gentle. A few days ago, because of Jiang Ruan's speech in court, the Jiang Fu had become the target of public criticism. Even Jiang Su had been distressed for a few days. As a result, in Shen Mingzhen's eyes, Jiang Ruan was a rough, incompetent, cowardly, and ugly mountain village girl. However, seeing her today, not only did she have the bearing of a noble in the palace, just her appearance alone was comparable to Jiang Su's. The eldest daughter of the Jiang family? A foreign with high cheekbones said, the daughter who was treated harshly by Minister Jiang. The heavens have taken pity on her. She lost her mother at such a young age and ended up in such a miserable state. If Imperial Censor Wang had not met her by chance, who knows how much suffering she would have suffered. Everyone raised their heads. Walking at the front was Xia Yan and Jiang Su. Xia Yan's clothing was appropriate, perfectly displaying her gentle scholarly aura. With one look, one could tell that she was a gentle and virtuous woman. This kind of attire would not steal Jiang Su's limelight. Needless to say, Jiang Dan was so scared that she didn't even dare to breathe loudly. She lowered her head and stood where she was, hoping that no one would notice her. Jiang Li had long since rejoiced in other people's misfortune. What was unexpected was Jiang Su's attitude. She only stood to one side and smiled, not saying a word. The young lady who came leisurely was wearing a snow-white fox fur coat with embroidered edges. The coat reached her waist, making her figure even more graceful and moving. Below her waist was a palace white embroidered brocade skirt. The skirt was very large, and when she moved, it was as if clouds and mist were lingering around her. She was wearing a silver rat waistcoat, and her long hair was tied behind her head, with two pure white ribbons hanging down. Her face was unadorned, and there was a faint smile on her pale cherry lips. She was dignified and elegant, and her facial features were naturally beautiful. That innocent and pure look with a hint of aloofness was as moving as a fairy. Along the way, the womenfolk present were already full of praises. In the main hall of the Shenfu, the Furens and young ladies had been waiting for a long time. Those who were familiar with each other sat together and chatted. Someone said, "I heard that the eldest miss of the Jiang family will also appear today." Jiang Wan nodded. Jiang Li smiled and said, "Mingzhen Mimi, this is my eldest sister. My eldest sister has just returned from the rural residence and is not very familiar with the affairs of the capital. This is also the first time she has come to your Fu." Speaking of the second miss of the Jiang Fu, everyone coincidentally thought of Jiang Su's talent and appearance. One by one, they nodded in agreement. Naturally, the second miss of the Jiang family is excellent. She is like a fairy, and eldest miss of the Jiang family is far inferior. The smile on the round-faced madam's face deepened. She nodded at the madam with high cheekbones, who did not look worried, and unhurriedly sipped her tea. The discussion had yet to end when someone called out, "Look, Jiang Furen and second miss have arrived. It's the eldest miss of the Jiang family." A Furen murmured. Jiang Wan only smiled quietly and did not reply. This made Shen Mingzhen's punch feel as if it had landed on cotton, completely ineffective. Shen Mingzhen held her breath and simply pulled Jiang Su's hand. "Mother, Furen and her sisters in the main hall have been waiting for a long time. Let Jiang Furen and Su Jie go quickly." The young girl walked closer and closer, and when they saw her appearance, everyone could not help but hold their breaths. She was naturally fair, and under the light makeup, she was actually like the finest mutton-fat jade. Her lips were even redder, resembling the reddest clouds in the morning. Her eyes were pitch black, and as the splendor circulated, they were as charming as the spring sun. However, when one took a closer look, one would feel that those upturned eyes seemed to contain a trace of ice-cold mockery. Jiang Su was already elegant and refined, but this young girl's beauty was lively and fragrant. Although Jiang Su was already elegant and refined, this young girl's beauty was lively and fragrant. Everyone, who was used to seeing fairies, felt their eyes light up. It was as if they could see a nimble spirit emerging from the flowering shrubs, brushing aside the flowers and brushing away the willows. The woman next to her smiled and said, "Although she is a pitiful person, I have heard that her 8 characters are the bane of her marriage. Minister Jiang is usually just, so there must be a reason for this." This woman had a round plate face, and her smiling eyes formed slits. She was simply like the benevolent and affluent bodhisattva in the temple. She looked amiable and amiable. She continued, "It's just that she grew up in the rural residence. How can it be compared to growing up in the Fu? Her conduct is certainly inappropriate. She is not as outstanding as the second miss of the Jiang Fu." She emphasized this, and a trace of contempt flashed in Shen Mingzhen's eyes. She said, "The capital is different from the rural residence. Miss Jiang must look carefully. Eldest Jiang Miss and second Jiang Miss standing together, the contrast is too stark." For Jiang Su, this was a common occurrence, but today was different, because the people behind Jiang Su quickly attracted the attention of the people. Shen Mingzhen was arrogant and despotic, and only mentioned Jiang Su and Xia Yan in her speech. This was a rude thing, but Shen Furen did not blame her and only smiled in response. Obviously, this was already a common occurrence. Shen Mingzhen was indeed the pearl in the Shen Fu's palm, spoiled since childhood. Lu Zhu and Lian Qiao's faces flashed with indignation. While this side was fighting openly and covertly, Xia Yan was only chatting and laughing with Shen Furen, seemingly not paying attention to this side. Naturally, she would not speak up to help. The most astonishing thing was that when she stood next to Jiang Su Su, their grace was on par with each other. If one were to look closely, they would feel that the elegant and refined fairy, in front of this lively and fragrant elf, suddenly lost some of her luster. That incomparably pure Snow White was slightly inferior to this passionate and unrestrained red. Looking at the young girl's movements, her skirt did not move in the slightest, her hands were folded neatly in front of her chest, and her hair was also motionless. Under her bright and dazzling appearance, there was a quiet and noble elegance. This kind of unique charm rarely appeared on a young girl, and it only made people feel that it was rare. Chapter 43. Xia Yan's and Jiang Su Su's expressions changed at the same time. The Furens had already started whispering, "What kind of wild village girl is this? From her bearing, she seems to have come from the palace. Exactly, she looks about the same as second Jiang Mississippi. How could she be so bad? Her appearance is also good. She's even more beautiful than second Mississippi." For the first time, everyone's focus was not on Jiang Su Su. Jiang Wan continued to stare steadily forward. Her expression did not change and she wore a slight smile on her face, as if this was not her first time in the Shenfu. Such steadiness and calmness caused those who had originally wanted to watch the bustle to look at her in a new light. The round-faced Furen's face had long since darkened. On the contrary, the Furen with high cheekbones nodded repeatedly. Shen Mingzhen, who had followed, had long since exploded in anger. She glared fiercely at Jiang Wan and walked over to grab Jiang Su Su's hand. Without another glance at Jiang Wan, she walked to the female side of the banquet. Xia Yan smiled slightly, as if she had not seen anything. She chatted and laughed with Shen Furen as they sat down. Although Jiang Li's temperament was arrogant, she also had good friends among the young ladies. Perhaps to deliberately isolate Jiang Wan, she even pulled Jiang Dan, who she usually did not pay much attention to, away. Whether it was intentional or not, Jiang Wan was left standing at the side of the banquet, not knowing where to sit. Although the Furens and young ladies were amazed by Jiang Ruan's appearance and bearing, all the guests present were familiar with Shen Furen. Naturally, they had to maintain a friendly relationship with the Jiang Fu. The current Furen of the Jiang Fu was Xia Yan and not Zhao Mei. Those who knew would not take the initiative to help Jiang Wan out. Moreover, Jiang Ruan's appearance was too splendid. If the young miss sat with her, she was afraid that her limelight would be stolen. For a moment, only one person was left. Lu Zhu and Lian Qiao stood behind Jiang Wan, feeling somewhat stifled. They thought that this visit to the Shenfu was like losing face, causing people to feel unreasonably awkward. However, at this moment, they heard a clear female voice from the banquet, "Eldest Jiang Miss, please sit here." From the banquet for the female side of the banquet, a budding young lady stood up. This young lady was dressed in a blue cotton coat. Her skin was slightly dark, but her features were very beautiful. Between her brows, there was a faint trace of heroic spirit. In her previous life, Jiang Wan had also known this young girl. Her name was Lin Zixiang, and she was the eldest daughter of the current Lin Taisher. He was an extremely righteous person. In his previous life, Lin Zixiang married the third prince as his concubine. Although chief scholar Lin did not have much power in the court, he still had a very important position. After Lin Zixiang married the third prince, she was not favored. After chief scholar Lin was stripped of his official position by the emperor, he became even more depressed. The third prince had a human face but a beast's heart. He had many concubines in his manor. The child in Lin Zixiang's belly was killed by one of the third prince's favored concubines. The third prince defended his favored concubines. In her past life, the women in the palace would treat this matter as a joke when they were idle. Jiang Yuan sighed in her heart for Lin Zixiang. Such a strong woman had actually met such a tragic end. After her death, she was even used as a topic of discussion. The heavens were really unfair. In her previous life, at the palace banquet, Jiang Yuan had also seen Lin Zixiang from afar. Lin Zixiang, who was dressed in simple and plain clothing, was surrounded by a crowd of gorgeous orioles and swallows. Her appearance had attracted Jiang Yuan's attention at a glance. They were the type of people who married people who were unwilling to marry and were imprisoned in a small and narrow prison for the rest of their lives. Jiang Yuan smiled at Lin Zixiang and walked over to sit beside her. Lin Zixiang nodded at her and Jiang Yuan softly said, "Many thanks. I just can't bear to see them act like this." Lin Zixiang said, "The rich and noble families are always so self-righteous, yet they keep making things difficult for a little girl." Jiang Yuan could not help but laugh when she saw Lin Zixiang's serious expression. In her heart, her impression of Lin Zixiang increased by a few notches. As Jiang Yuan and Lin Zixiang spoke, Jiang Li secretly hated them. Shen Mingzhen was talking to Jiang Su when she saw this scene. She frowned and said, "What kind of ability does that Jiang Yuan have? Lin Zixiang usually looks up to the sky, why is she talking to her?" Jiang Su smiled and said, "The Jijia is always so likable. She's clearly a foxy woman." Shen Mingzhen said angrily. In a blink of an eye, she saw Jiang Li glaring at Jiang Yuan. She thought for a moment and said, Jijia, I see that Jiang Li also hates her. Why don't you help Jiang Li?" Jiang Su was startled and immediately smiled. "How can you say that? Don't get any crooked ideas. The Jijia has just returned from the rural residence. If anything were to happen to her, her reputation would definitely be tarnished. How would she be able to conduct herself in the capital in the future?" Shen Mingzhen also smiled. Jijia has the heart of a bodhisattva, but you also have to look at the person. Today, she deliberately wore a red dress, wasn't it to steal your limelight? She clearly knows that you like to be plain, yet she still wears such bright colors. I think it's a provocation. Jijia, you can't always be tolerant. This. Jiang Su was somewhat hesitant. Her hesitation fell into Shen Mingzhen's eyes and she said, Jijia, don't be afraid. I will stand up for you. She then waved at Jiang Li who was sitting on the other side and said, Jiang Li Jijia. Jiang Li was somewhat overwhelmed by the favor and turned her head. She got up and walked to Shen Mingzhen's side. Among the young ladies of the influential families in the capital, Shu daughters and Di daughters were actually divided into two circles. Although Jiang Li tried her best to curry favor with Shen Mingzhen only befriended Jiang Su. Jiang Li could only feel jealous in her heart. Now that Shen Mingzhen had taken the initiative to greet her, although she knew that there must be a reason, she still smiled and responded. A trace of contempt flashed in Shen Mingzhen's eyes, but her smile was sweet. She crooked her little finger and said, Jiang Li Jijia, I have something to tell you. Jiang Li leaned over and Shen Mingzhen whispered a few words in her ear. At first, Jiang Li's expression was somewhat flabbergasted. Then, she hesitantly looked at Jiang Su who was sitting on the side. However, Jiang Su only lowered her head and drank her tea. She still wore the same smile as usual, and no one could tell what she was feeling. Jiang Li Jijia, have you thought it through? Shen Mingzhen raised her eyes to look at her, and her tone became even more charming. I am doing this for you. Jiang Li Jijia was silent for a long time. Finally, she clenched her teeth and said, all right, many thanks to Mingzhen Mimi for fulfilling my wish. Shen Mingzhen giggled and pulled Jiang Li's hand to sit beside her. Since that's the case, let's talk a little more. Jiang Li paused and sat down beside her. The two of them huddled together and began to talk in low voices. While they were doing all this, Jiang Su sat upright on the side and drank her tea with her head lowered. She seemed to be completely unaware of what Shen Mingzhen and Jiang Li were doing. Only when Jiang Li sat down did she raise her eyes to look at Jiang Ruan from afar. There was a trace of ruthlessness in her eyes. However, she did not expect that when she raised her eyes, Jiang Ruan seemed to feel her gaze and slightly tilted her head. Their eyes met, and Jiang Ruan smiled at her. The corners of her upturned eyes clearly revealed a trace of a smile, but for no reason at all, it made Jiang Su feel a chill down her spine. When she looked again, Jiang Ruan had already turned her head away, as if nothing had happened. Chapter 44. Because it was her first visit to the Shenfu, Jiang Ruan only spoke with Lin Zixiang, and the surrounding young ladies only looked at her from afar. Jiang Su, on the other hand, had a good impression of her, and there were many who were intimate with her. Lin Zixiang glanced at Jiang Su, who was talking to Colonel Lin's daughter, and coldly snorted, pretentious. Why do you say so? Jiang Ruan picked up the teacup in front of her and asked. On the surface, she is aloof, but in her bones, she is vulgar. If this kind of person isn't hypocritical, then what is? She still talks about jade mansions and fairies, but this is just a worldly view that is blinded by appearances. Lin Zixiang's words were blunt, but Lu Zhu, who was behind her, laughed. Chief Censor Lin was in charge of the palace's literature, history, and ephemera. Literature and history emphasized fairness. Chief Censor Lin and Imperial Censor Wang were both upright and outspoken people. Lin Zixiang had inherited Chief Censor Lin's straightforward temperament. Lin Zixiang's straightforward temperament was naturally not popular among the young ladies, but Jiang Ruan felt that it was very good. It was rare to find a frank and straightforward person in this world, and this kind of person was much more adorable than those who had the mouth of a Buddha and the heart of a snake. However, with Lin Zixiang's temperament, if she were to marry the third prince and lose her life like this, it would really make one sigh with regret. Lin Zixiang noticed Jiang Ruan's gaze and frowned. Why are you looking at me like this, as if you're looking at a pitiful person? Is that so? Jiang Ruan smiled and changed the topic. Miss Lin dislikes my second sister so much, but you are willing to sit with me. I am really grateful. It has nothing to do with you. Lin Zixiang was also merciless towards Jiang Ruan. I just don't want to see them bully young ladies. You are the same as your second sister, both of you are also putting on an act, but you are not like her, who pretends to be pure and untainted by a speck of dust, which makes one feel more at ease. Jiang Ruan's heart was filled with admiration for Lin Zixiang, and she said, I am not considered a fairy, and every day, I am too busy to deal with worldly affairs. What I do is worldly affairs, and what I eat are the 5 grains and miscellaneous grains. I am just a commoner. Hearing her words, Lin Zixiang could not help but look at Jiang Ruan a few more times. You have some self-awareness. Lian Qiao wanted to say something but hesitated. In the end, she held it in. Jiang Ruan herself did not mind at all. She knew that this young lady of the Lin family did not have any ill intentions, it was just that her mouth was unforgiving. This kind of person was actually the type of person who appeared to be very wise on the surface. It was just that her temperament was a little more straightforward, but how could it be that she did not have colored glass in her heart? Unknowingly, more than half of the time spent eating tea and talking had passed by. Jiang Li stood up from her seat and walked to Jiang Ruan's side to say in a low voice, Dejijia, I want to make a trip to the washroom. Will you accompany me? Jiang Ruan smiled, but I don't know the way. Jiang Li glanced at Shen Mingzhen and said, It's all right, Miss Shen's maid will lead the way. It's just that I'm a little afraid of going alone. I have just reported to Mother, and mother has also agreed. You and I are sisters, so I will have to trouble eldest sister to take care of Lin Yang for a while. Her voice was neither loud nor soft, just enough for the surrounding Furins and young ladies to hear, making it difficult for Jiang Ruan to refuse. After all, accompanying his Shu younger sister to the washroom was not a big deal. Jiang Li had already lowered herself so much. Now that she had just returned to the capital, she could not allow any unfavorable rumors to spread. Jiang Ruan nodded. What's the point of saying all this? I will accompany you. She then stood up. Seeing this, Lu Zhu and Lian Qiao wanted to follow her, but Jiang Li held out her hand to stop them. It's just that I will be back soon. I did not bring my own maid. These two maids can stay here. Shen Mimi's maids are enough. Lu Zhu and Lian Qiao were somewhat worried. Jiang Ruan smiled at them and said, It's all right, I will be back soon. Jiang Li happily pulled Jiang Ruan's hand and left the banquet table. After the two of them left the banquet table, Shen Furen seemed to have just noticed that two people were missing from the banquet table. She said to Xia Yan, who was sitting beside her, How come the eldest miss and third miss of your fu have disappeared? Xia Yan smiled and glanced at the banquet table. Pretending to be unintentional, she said, Perhaps they have gone to the washroom. With so many people watching, it should be fine. Shen Mingzhen smiled proudly and pulled Jiang Su's hand, saying, Su, Jie, you just have to watch the show later. Jiang Su was a little uneasy and looked at her hesitantly. Don't do anything out of line. De Jie has just arrived. You are so kind. Shen Mingzhen was impatient. It's just to teach her a lesson. Let's see if she still dares to be so ostentatious in the future. Jiang Ruan and Jiang Li walked unhurriedly along the small path in the Shenfu garden. At the front was Shen Mingzhen's personal maid, Xiao Chui. From time to time, Jiang Li stole glances at Jiang Ruan. Seeing that Jiang Ruan had a smile on her face and seemed to be completely unaware of what was about to happen, Jiang Li was relieved. When they reached a small corridor with no one around, Jiang Li reached out to cover her stomach and looked at Jiang Ruan. De Jie, I can't hold it in any longer. Why don't I let the maid bring me to the washroom first? I will come back to find you later. Are you all right by yourself? Jiang Ruan asked worriedly. It's nothing, I will be out soon. Jiang Li frowned, as if she was really in pain. Xiao Chui, who was standing at the side, also said, Miss Jiang, I will send second miss to the washroom. You can sit in the room next to us for a while. This is the room that the Fu uses to entertain guests. There are fragrant tea and snacks inside. Jiang Ruan glanced at the door, thought for a moment, and nodded, Okay, Lin Yang, you must hurry. I know, De Jie, quickly go in. Jiang Li said anxiously. Jiang Ruan pushed the door open and went in. Outside, Jiang Li and Xiao Chui lifted their skirts and hurriedly left. When the sound of footsteps could no longer be heard, the door was pushed open again and Jiang Ruan walked out. She tightened the crimson crane cloak on her body and a cold smile floated on her face. She did not know who would enter this room in a while, but if the person who entered was alone with the two of them, it would definitely be seen by Jiang Li and the others, who were worried about getting lost. In the long run, her reputation would be in a mess. Perhaps this was Shen Mingzhen's idea. Shen Mingzhen had only met her for the first time today, yet she was able to come up with such a vicious scheme to frame her. Perhaps Jiang Su had also added fuel to the fire. What Jiang Su was best at was using a borrowed knife to kill others. However, Jiang Su was not the only one who knew how to use a borrowed knife to kill others. Jiang Ruan slowly walked along the deserted corridor. She walked freely and leisurely, full of enthusiasm. If Jiang Li was present, she would definitely be shocked. This was because this was clearly not the first time she had entered the Shenfu. It was indeed the first time she had entered the Shenfu, but in her previous life in the palace, Jiang Quan and the eighth prince would always inform her of some confidential matters. At that time, she had thought that they did not keep any secrets from her and treated her as one of their own. Therefore, she had always kept this information in mind, hoping that it would be of help in the future. She had not expected that they would actually help her today. Those confidential matters also included the secrets of the Shenfu. Jiang Li's biggest mistake was that she, who did not know the way, could only obediently stay in that room and wait for someone to come. Unfortunately, whether it was in her previous life or this life, she had always kept the Shenfu structure in mind. Chapter 45. In her previous life, in the palace, the only thing she did not lack was long hours. She strived to make her days more interesting. Whenever Jiang Quan and the eighth prince spoke to her, she was willing to take them out at night and repeatedly chew on them when she was not in the mood to sleep. The layout of the Shenfu was the same as in her memory. Now, it was effortless to walk. She turned a corner from the long corridor, detoured a section of the road, and walked to a small room behind the garden. She pushed the door open and entered. The layout of the room was extremely simple. It seemed to be an abandoned study that had not been used for a long time. There were a few travel books haphazardly placed on the table. Jiang Wan detoured to the front of the desk. In the air above the desk, there was a picture of a bamboo forest blown by the wind. She looked at it for a moment, then reached out to lift the picture scroll. From behind the scroll, a flat and neat wall appeared. Jiang Wan stretched out her hands and placed them on the snow-white wall in front of her. She slowly probed. Not long after, her hands pressed on something. A crisp sound was heard, and the wall in the middle slowly caved in, revealing a small secret compartment. She paused, reached into the secret compartment, and took out a cloth bag. The cloth bag was quite heavy in her hands. She weighed it in her hands and estimated that it was something like a book. Jiang Wan smiled slightly. This was the special account book of Assistant Minister Shen's family. However, for those in the officialdom, it was inevitable that there would be a source of money. Assistant Minister Shen had handed this matter over to Shen Furen. It was not right for Shen Furen to hide these account books, so she simply placed them in this abandoned study. Normally, who would have thought that they would be so carelessly hidden behind a picture scroll? However, in her previous life, when the eighth prince had met her in private, he had mentioned this matter to her. Assistant Minister Shen and Jiang Quan were on the same side. Later on, for some unknown reason, they had some differences. Jiang Quan did not care about it, as it turned out that Assistant Minister Shen had something on him. She did not know how these account books had fallen into Jiang Quan's hands. Once these account books were revealed, many people would be implicated, and it was bound to cause another upheaval. No matter what, she had obtained these account books today. In the end, this trip had not been in vain. Jiang Wan wrapped the cloth bag in her hands. Suddenly, she froze and turned her head. There was a person standing in front of the horizontal screen in the room. At this moment, he was looking at her indifferently. In the depths of his eyes, there was an indiscernible emotion. When he took a closer look, he saw that the person was dressed in black. His features were strangely cold, and his face was unspeakably familiar. It was the black-clothed young man whom he had met in the temple that day when he returned to the capital. Who would have thought that they would meet again here today? Was it a blessing or a curse? Jiang Wan stared at him vigilantly, but he only stared straight at her chest. Jiang Wan was slightly annoyed when she heard him suddenly speak, account book. It turned out that he was staring at the account book in her bosom. Jiang Wan stared blankly and frowned. You want the account book? She did not know where this young man came from, but he actually wanted the account book as well. Could it be that he was also at odds with the Shen residents? Jiang Ruan's heart paused for a moment before she fished out the account book from her bosom and threw it far away. The black-clothed youth took it and looked at her thoughtfully. His handsome face, on the other hand, was as cold as ever, and no one could tell what he was feeling. Jiang Ruan's heart was free and easy. Originally, she had only wanted this account book to cause trouble for the Shen residents and also to cause some trouble for Jiang Li. If she really wanted to say something, keeping this kind of thing would be a hot potato. Now that her wings were not fully grown, there were many things that were inconvenient for her to show her face. Keeping it would be difficult to sort it out. Since this person was at odds with the Shen residents, why not sell him a personal favor? She would be happy to see that the Shen residents would not have good days. The black-clothed young man was tall and slender. Standing in the middle of the room, he seemed to add an indescribable brilliance to the room. His handsome and heroic features had an indescribable air of nobility. Jiang Ruan lowered her head and pondered. She did not know who this person was, but the elegance he exuded was from the inside out. He was really mysterious. Fortunately, today he did not have the murderous aura he had that night. It seemed that he did not have any murderous intent towards her, which was a blessing amidst misfortune. The 2 times they had met, it had been such a scene, so they could be considered acquaintances. It was just that every time they were doing something bad, she did not know what kind of fate it was. Jiang Ruan saw that the account book had already fallen into the hands of the other party, so there was no benefit in staying any longer. She prepared to leave, but the other party did not move and only stood quietly in the same place. Before Jiang Ruan pushed the door open, she suddenly said, "On the woodshed beam behind the kitchen of the Shenfu, under the locust tree in the rear courtyard of Shenmingzhen, under the rockery in the garden of the Fu, there are also good things. Under the wooden plank under the bed in Assistant Minister Shen's study, there is a secret passage. The secret passage may be rich with all kinds of things. I hope that you will be able to lend your distinguished self a hand." The black-clothed young man's expression froze, but Jiang Ruan had already pushed the door open and left. After Jiang Ruan left, a person suddenly jumped down from the beam and walked to the front of the young man. With his head lowered, he said, "Master, that girl's words cannot be trusted. Jiang Fu's daughter." The young man lowered his eyes, his long eyelashes concealing the emotions in his eyes. He coldly said, "Investigate her background." After Jiang Ruan left the room, she heaved a deep sigh of relief. The identity of the person in the room was too dangerous. Although she did not know who he was, she had immersed herself in the palace for so many years in her previous life. A person's identity could be concealed, but his temperament and elegance could not be doubted. Just like after she had been reborn, the servant girls and old women around her always said that she was like a noble who had come out of the palace. However, this was a habit that she had developed in her previous life. The person in the room must have lived like a prince, with an innate elegance seeping through his bones. If she had not guessed wrongly, he should be a member of the imperial family. It was unwise to be involved with such a person, but Jiang Ruan still did so, and even deliberately revealed the Shenfu's secret to him. She knew that her heart was unreconciled. Even though she had often warned herself to be calm and patient in all matters, when all was said and done, she still carried the resentment of her previous life, and was filled with loneliness and indignation. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. If that person did not deal with the Shenfu, then he would also not deal with Jiang Quan. No matter what, she would be happy to see this happen. Shaking her head, Jiang Ruan dispelled all the random thoughts in her heart. In short, she had to deal with the matter at hand first, and it had not yet reached a troublesome stage. The journey was smooth, and when she returned to the banquet, Shenmingzhen could not help but be startled when she saw Jiang Ruan. She cried out involuntarily, "Why did you come back?" Jiang Su timely concealed the surprise in her eyes and stood up. She asked curiously, "Why did the Jie come back alone? Where is third younger sister?" Jiang Ruan smiled faintly. "Lin Yang was in a hurry to go to the washroom, so she let me wait first. I waited for a long time and coincidentally met a little servant girl, so she brought me back here first." "Little servant girl?" Shen Mingjun hurriedly said, her voice a little higher, causing the surrounding Tai and young ladies to raise their eyebrows. However, at this moment, she could not care less, and only questioned, which little servant girl, what is her name? Could it be that you are trying to frame me? Jiang Wan was flabbergasted. Mingjun Mimi, what are you saying? If she is not a little servant girl from your Fu, how could I have come back in one piece on my first visit to the Shenfu? I am someone who does not know the way. Jiang Su's eyes flashed, that is indeed the case. Jiang Wan smiled again, however, I forgot to ask for that little servant girl's name. I only know that she is clever and cute, and she left after sending me to the front. Chapter 46. With such a large Shenfu, it was impossible for them to eagerly search for an unknown little girl. Jiang Ruan's words were beyond reproach, leaving Shen Mingjun speechless. She scolded Jiang Li fiercely in her heart before glaring at Jiang Wan and sitting down uneasily. Jiang Su's smile did not diminish as she picked up the teacup in front of her and took a small sip. Her gaze quietly followed Jiang Wan, but she felt that Jiang Ruan's expression did not change. The steam from the hot tea gathered on her pretty face, and it was like looking at a flower in the fog, her emotions could not be clearly seen. Jiang Su only felt that something was weighing on her heart, and her intuition was not at ease. She could only pretend to chat and joke with the young ladies around her. Jiang Wan had returned safely, so Jiang Li did not gain any advantage. Shen Mingjun beckoned another servant girl over, and the servant girl hurriedly left. Not long after, she saw Jiang Li and Xiao Chui rushing over. Jiang Li's face was filled with uncontrollable anger. She walked in front of Jiang Wan and said rather angrily, "Why did you come back first?" Not waiting for Jiang Wan to speak, Lin Zixiang, who was standing at the side, could not stand it and said disdainfully, "In any case, the Jiang Fu is a large official's family. How can there be no respect for seniority? A Shu's younger sister actually dares to be rude to a Di's daughter." Her voice was not low, and many of the madams of the officials' families looked over. Jiang Li's face reddened, and her heart was filled with anger. She heard Jiang Wan say with a smile, "It's nothing, there are not many rules between us sisters." Lin Yang was just impatient. Lin Zixiang frowned, "If this were in our Fu, we would certainly teach her well." This time, Jiang Wan did not speak and only smiled. There was no anger in her expression, but it was somewhat difficult to tell what she meant. Jiang Su stood up and said with a smile, "What's wrong?" De Jijia has just returned from the rural residence, and there are many things that I am not clear about. Third sister is still young, De Jijia should not argue with her. These words were said to be clever, and although it was not Jiang Ruan's fault, it sounded like Jiang Wan was at fault. Some of the surrounding Furins and young ladies who did not know what was going on looked at Jiang Wan with a strange expression, as if Jiang Wan was really harsh on her Shu sister. Jiang Wan smiled and stared unblinkingly at Jiang Su. Jiang Su's heart went numb under the gaze of Jiang Ruan's bewitching eyes, and unconsciously, her back stiffened. In her heart, Jiang Wan sneered. Jiang Su had always put on the facade of a fairy and did good deeds. Even in her previous life, if it had not been for the fact that she had not yet been imprisoned as a demoness who brought calamity to the country, this younger sister of hers would still constantly comfort and advise her, calm and patient. How could it be that she could not keep her cool now, and even deliberately brought up the matter of her return from the rural residence so that everyone would keep a respectful distance from her? Could it be that in this life, her temperament had changed, and Jiang Su's temperament had also changed? Or could it be that Jiang Su had always been like this? It was just that in his previous life, he had wholeheartedly trusted her and had thus turned a blind eye to all of her malicious words. Lin Zixiang glanced coldly at Jiang Su. She had a proud and aloof temperament and did not conceal her dislike for Jiang Su. She sneered through her nose, "Fake." Jiang Su was startled. She forced a smile but did not speak. In this way, it seemed more like Lin Zixiang was taking advantage of her position to bully others, and Jiang Su had compromised for the sake of the overall situation. Behind her, Lu Zhu almost laughed out loud. Lin Zixiang was also a wonderful person. In front of such a room full of people, she dared to so brazenly humiliate Jiang Su, and yet no one dared to say anything wrong about her. Jiang Yuan smiled and said, "It turns out that I did not make it clear to Lin Yang. Lin Yang, just now, I waited for you for a long time, but you did not return. I was afraid that mother would be worried, and coincidentally, I met a little servant girl, so I asked her to bring me back first. That little servant girl should have come over to inform you. Why, did you not meet her?" Jiang Li held back her anger. She had not seen the little servant girl that Jiang Yuan had mentioned, but Jiang Yuan should not have been lying. Otherwise, how could she have returned so easily on her first visit to the Shenfu? In this way, Shen Mingzhen's arrangements could be considered as a waste of effort. She had provoked Shen Mingzhen for no reason, and Jiang Li once again fiercely cursed Jiang Yuan in her heart. Then, with a lukewarm attitude, she said, "If Dejijie is not willing to wait for Mimi, then forget it. What is the point of saying all this nonsense?" Jiang Yuan did not make a sound again, and only smiled as she sat down at the side. Such actions fell into the eyes of the Furins, and at this moment, their speculations were confirmed. Thinking about it, this daughter of the Jiang Fu was not as the Jiang Fu had said, that upon her return, she had gained favor. Even a Shu younger sister could oppose and provoke her in such a manner. Presumably, her days must have been rather difficult. It was just that her temperament and tolerance were surprisingly good. She was not as petty as those who came from the countryside, nor was she blindly cowardly. She did not quarrel, and was natural and unrestrained. She indeed had the demeanor of the eldest daughter. Jiang Li did not expect that today's actions not only did not cause trouble for Jiang Yuan, but also caused Jiang Yuan to gain a good reputation. Shen Mingzhen was also angry with her, and in her heart, she hated Jiang Yuan. When she raised her eyes and saw that Jiang Su's expression was slightly stiff, she suddenly laughed. Jiang Yuan's return to the Fu was not a good thing for her, and at the same time, affected Jiang Su. Otherwise, how could her fairy-like Jijie have repeatedly lost her composure today? Presumably, it was the first time that her appearance had been compared to Jiang Su's. As sisters of the Jiang Fu, although Jiang Su was usually like a fairy who did not eat the food and drink of the common people, it was ultimately because she had the reputation of being an exceptional beauty in the capital. Now that Jiang Yuan had arrived, the exceptional beauty had become a pair of pearls. There was someone who could stand shoulder to shoulder with her, or even be a cut above her. How could Jiang Su feel good? With this thought, Jiang Li's heart somewhat rejoiced in other people's misfortune. The day passed quickly, and Xia Yan took a few people to return to the Fu. Upon returning, she first reported the day's situation to the old Jiang madam. Xia Yan smiled and said, "Ruan Yang did very well today." All the Furen and Tai present praised Ruan Yang's outstanding appearance, saying that they had never seen Ruan Yang before. Today, Ruan Yang's beauty is indeed outstanding, worthy of the 4 words national beauty and heavenly fragrance. The old Jiang madam's expression changed slightly. It was not a good thing for a girl's appearance to be too outstanding. If Jiang Su was as elegant and refined as Jiang Su, it would have been fine, but Jiang Ruan's appearance was bright and beautiful. In the Ruanju, Lu Zhu delivered the heated hot water to Jiang Ruan's hands. After staying in the Shenfu for a day, even though it was just a matter of smiling and talking, it was also a matter of physical exhaustion. Jiang Yuan was already somewhat tired. Baiji closed the door and brought a silver basin over for Jiang Yuan to wash her hands. She carefully handed a soft handkerchief to Jiang Yuan to wipe her hands and said softly, miss, I heard the servants in the Fu say that Prefectural Magistrate Qian of the residence has been removed from his post by that person in the palace. Qian Wanli. Jiang Wan thought for a moment, because of Imperial Censor Wang. I heard that the prisoners in the prison have many grievances. The relatives of the prisoners submitted a complaint to the capital, and it just so happened that it was accepted by an upright official. After an investigation, it was discovered that there had been unjust cases for many years. Qian Wanli had received a lot of black-hearted money. The prisoners in the prison cried out their grievances fiercely, and it was unexpectedly not something that could be suppressed. From the streets to the ends of the alleys, the emperor, in a fit of anger, removed Qian Wanli from his post, and even said that he wanted to confiscate his property. Jiang Wan looked at the rippling water in the silver basin, and her mind involuntarily thought of the young widow she had met in the prison that day. Presumably, her grievances had been redressed. Heaven's justice was clear, and retribution was sometimes not entirely unreasonable. Chapter 47. The days flowed by like flowing water. Jiang Li was still as domineering as before. From time to time, she would say a few provocative words, but Jiang Wan ignored her. On the other hand, Jiang Su and her mother's attitude towards her was somewhat subtle. She did not know whether it was because she now saw people differently, or because Jiang Su and her mother could no longer keep their composure. Although the old Jiang madam treated Jiang Wan indifferently, she would not deliberately suppress her. In the blink of an eye, it was time for Jiang Quan and Jiang Chao to return to the Fu. It was already the end of the year, and there were many social engagements in the officialdom. Jiang Quan had said a few days ago that he would return to the Fu, but his superiors had something to do and delayed his return until today. Naturally, Xia Yan was extremely happy. Early on, she ordered people to tidy up and start preparing. She only said that they wanted to have a lively reunion dinner. Jiang Quan had worked hard for the Jiang Fu for a year, so they should reward him well. Jiang Li and Jiang Su were also very happy. Although Jiang Su appeared indifferent, she could not stop smiling. Although Jiang Quan was not kind to his daughter, he truly loved Jiang Su. In her previous life, he was willing to offend the emperor of the imperial palace in order to protect Jiang Su. This was evident from this. Jiang Su should have been Jiang Quan's proudest daughter. He was not stingy to give all his love to Jiang Su, and even used Jiang Wan to pave the way for Jiang Su. Now that she thought about it, she did not know whether to be sad or angry. It could only be said that Jiang Quan truly loved Xia Yan, which was why he loved their daughter so much. Jiang Chao was also the same. On the other hand, Jiang Quan had never paid attention to Jiang Wan and Jiang Xing. He did not beat or scold them, nor was he affectionate with them. Instead, they were like two insignificant outsiders. Even Jiang Li, because of the power of Second Yinyang's maiden family, could receive Jiang Quan's good attitude. Only the brother and sister did not. Thinking about it, Zhao Mei and General Zhao had long broken off their relationship, so there was no help in the officialdom. In the beginning, it was Zhao Mei who had taken the initiative to marry. She had not gained any advantage in terms of affection or power, so why would Jiang Quan feel even the slightest bit of pity? This was so that she and Jiang Xing could become stepping stones for Jiang Su and her brother. If they obstructed Jiang Su and her brother's path, they would be ruthlessly eliminated. Lost in thought, Jiang Wan forgot about it, and accidentally spilled a few drops. Bai Ji saw this and hurriedly said, "Miss, please be careful." Jiang Wan returned to her senses and straightened the teacup. "Has father returned?" Lian Xiao walked in from outside. Upon hearing Jiang Ruan's words, she replied, "He just returned and is currently talking to old Furen and Tai Tai." She glanced left and right before lowering her voice to say, "However, his complexion does not look too good. It seems that he has encountered something unpleasant." Bai Ji said, maybe it's official business. Coincidentally, Dewdrop rushed in with a sly smile on her face. Lian Xiao reprimanded her, what are you doing out of the blue? Aren't you afraid of disturbing Miss? Jiang Wan replied, if you have something to say, then say it. Young lady, you're really godly. Dewdrop blinked her eyes and said, this servant just went to the front to ask around and found out the reason why master is so unhappy. Lu Zhu's small mouth was sweet, and her mind worked quickly. Usually, when interacting with people in the marketplace, she was somewhat slick, and very easily became involved with the maids and older women. Thus, Jiang Wan often asked her to go out and keep an eye out for news, so that she would not be completely blind in the Jiangfu. Dewdrop was also smart and could always find out some information. This time, Lian Xiao did not care about reprimanding her and listened carefully to her. I heard that for some reason, she quarreled with Assistant Minister Shen. Assistant Minister Shen was extraordinarily angry, and Master also argued until his face and neck were red. The strange thing was that despite the quarrel, Miss Shen specially wrote an invitation to third young lady, inviting third young lady to the Fu to play. However, Master flew into a rage. Not only did he not allow third young lady to leave the Fu, he even grounded third young lady. What does this mean? Lian Xiao asked curiously. That day, third young lady and Miss Shen did not seem to have such a good relationship. Why did they not invite second young lady, but only third young lady? Dewdrop smiled mysteriously, the servants are all spreading the news that something has gone missing in the Shenfu. With such actions, it seems that they are suspecting third young lady. Wan Ju's maids were quite critical of Jiang Li. Usually, Jiang Li's eyes were at the top of her head, and her tone was unkind. She was far from Jiang Su's way of conducting herself, so all the maids and older women in the Fu were somewhat fed up with her. Therefore, when something happened to her, there were many who rejoiced in her misfortune. Bai Ji said, to suspect the Jiang Fu's young lady to this extent, it is no wonder that Master flew into a rage. If third young lady went, wouldn't that be slapping the Jiang Fu's face and admitting to stealing something? However, why did the Shenfu borrow Miss Shen's hand to send an invitation to third young lady? Could it be that they could even find out anything? This servant saw that although third young lady is usually somewhat domineering, she is not someone who takes advantage of others. There are many suspicious points in this. Besides, Master and Shendaran have a deep friendship, so it is unlikely that they would quarrel to this extent over some worldly possessions. What exactly did the Shenfu lose? What did they lose? Jiang Wan smiled slightly, and unhurriedly picked up the teacup and took a sip. It should be something very important. The Shenfu was in a state of turmoil. Assistant Minister Shen had discovered that his account book had gone missing. At that time, as an outsider, she had come to the Shenfu for the first time, so naturally, she was not clear about the structure of the Shenfu. Moreover, only Jiang Li had left the banquet, so it was difficult not to suspect Jiang Li. However, Jiang Li would not have gone to retrieve the account book on her own for no reason, so it could only be Jiang Quan's idea. There was nothing wrong with Assistant Minister Shen's way of thinking. The Shenfu and the Jiangfu's good relationship had originally involved a pile of unclear relationships of interest. If Jiang Quan were to get hold of Assistant Minister Shen's weakness, from then on, Assistant Minister Shen would have to lower his head in front of Jiang Quan. It was just that this matter was extremely improper, so it was no wonder that Assistant Minister Shen wanted to shed all pretense of cordiality. Right now, Jiang Quan was really wronged. This matter indeed had nothing to do with him. Jiang Wan smiled. The relationship between people was extremely fragile. Even if Jiang Quan and the Shenfu were to forcefully maintain a friendly facade because of the matter of the account book, today's matter would be like a thorn that was deeply buried in Assistant Minister Shen's heart. There would come a day when this thorn would break through the soil and sprout. At this moment, the battle line between Jiang Quan and the Shenfu had already begun to break. Jiang Li had wanted to harm her, but she had become the scapegoat. This could be considered a small punishment as a warning to the greater good. Henceforth, the Shenfu would view Jiang Li as a thorn in their side, and Jiang Quan would not be happy in his heart. This could also be considered as Jiang Li bringing this upon herself. In her previous life, Jiang Quan had ultimately taken the Shenfu's account book and grasped the Shenfu's Achilles heel. However, at that time, the Jiang Fu was already flourishing with each passing day, and the Shenfu could only bow its head in submission. It was still early in this life, and the Jiang Fu still needed to rely on the Shenfu for many things. The premature rupture of the alliance was a disaster rather than a blessing for Jiang Quan. Jiang Wan patted her clothes and stood up. Since father and second brother have already returned to the Fu, we can't not go and take a look. There's no need to say that we are disrespectful or unfilial. Let's go. I haven't seen father and second brother for 5 years, and I don't know how they look now. Chapter 48. In the parlor, Xia Yan was dressed in a short, lotus-colored, satin jacket and a blue, gauze fan skirt, which accentuated her waist. Although she was already a mother of 2 children, she still looked like a young woman. Her skin was full and moist, slightly adorned, and her hair was also mainly beautiful. In front of a room full of concubines, she was like a slender and elegant lotus. In addition to her scholarly aura, she was truly a rare beauty. Jiang Quan's gaze softened as he looked at her. When he said, "You've worked hard," his eyes were full of tenderness. Second Yang, who was standing at the side, could not bear to watch. Her carefully groomed eyebrows raised, and she deliberately softened her voice, "Lao Yi, we have finally welcomed you back." Second Yang could actually be considered a beauty, but her beauty was somewhat sharp. Her face was thin, and she appeared somewhat unkind, unlike Xia Yan who was gentle and affectionate. Moreover, this kind of flattery seemed somewhat artificial. Jiang Quan's face was somewhat impatient, but he indifferently responded. Seeing this, Second Yang's hands fiercely twisted the corners of her clothes a few times. Eldest Yang wore a long, pale, straight, and white dress. Her lips held a humble smile as she quietly retreated to one side. Compared to the 2 beautiful maidservants by Xia Yan's side, she was more like a second-rank maidservant. Jiang Quan did not even look at her, so Jiang Su stepped forward and smiled, "Father has returned." Jiang Quan usually smiled in a carefree manner outside, but in front of Jiang Su, his face had never darkened. A trace of a smile appeared on his face as he reached out and patted her head, "I've brought you some small toys. Later, I'll have someone bring them to your room." Second Yang's eyes flashed with jealousy and hatred. The Jiang Fu had 4 daughters, and the only one to receive this special honor was Jiang Su. Jiang Chao, who was talking to the old Jiang madam, suddenly thought of something and opened his mouth. "Hasn't Wan Mimi returned? How come I don't see her shadow?" Jiang Su's smile froze, and Jiang Quan also seemed to have just remembered. His smile disappeared and his brows furrowed. Seeing this, Xia Yan smiled and was about to speak when a soft female voice sounded from the front of the hall, "Jiang Wan greets father." Both Jiang Quan and Jiang Chao raised their eyes to look, and saw a young girl wearing a dark red embroidered overcoat gracefully step forward. On her chest, there was a large embroidery of 8 large flowers. Her raven black hair was coiled up with a multicolored pearl hairpin. Her attire was simple yet extremely beautiful. However, what was even more beautiful was her appearance. Her skin was white as snow, her lips were red like cherry blossoms, and her beautiful eyes were filled with endless affection. However, from the corners of her eyes, there was a trace of faintly discernible coldness. She was beautiful and calm, like fire and ice. If one were to say that Jiang Su was a peerless beauty that only existed in the mortal world, then the young lady in front of his eyes was like a peerless beauty that did not exist in the mortal world. Her every move made people unable to take their eyes off her. Step by step, she steadily walked forward. Her walk was magnificent and charming. Stopping in front of Jiang Quan, she softly said, "Father." It was only then that Jiang Quan and Jiang Chao regained their senses. Both of them sized up the eldest daughter of the Jiang family who had just returned from the country house. Compared to 5 years ago, it was as if Jiang Wan had changed into a completely different person. Inside and out, there was not the slightest trace of her past self. Especially the gaze that had just walked over step by step, it was hazy and could not be seen clearly. They only felt that she was like a person from another world, causing their hearts to feel somewhat cold. However, in front of them, she was smiling sweetly, as if the cold gaze just now was just an illusion. Jiang Quan's probing gaze fell on Jiang Wan, but he did not open his mouth for a long time. Jiang Wan paused, then slowly raised her head and looked straight into Jiang Quan's eyes. The moment she saw him, Jiang Wan was momentarily absent-minded. A trace of emotion, unknown whether it was sadness or happiness, floated in her heart. Jiang Quan was still in his prime and had the appearance of a scholar. Jiang Ruan's eyes flashed with the scene of the last time she saw Jiang Quan in her previous life. At that time, her biological father had mercilessly dragged her from her bedroom to the main hall. In front of all the civil and military officials, he had accused her of being a demoness who brought disaster to the country. She had crawled on the ground, her eyes wide open in disbelief, in exchange for his cold and heartless gaze. That kind of disdain, as if he was looking at a stain in his own life, made her heart as cold as an ice cellar. After that, she had been imprisoned and tortured by Jiang Su, implicating the entire Zhao family. In prison, she had listened to her own father rise step by step, become an official, and finally become the imperial uncle. When he wore the official's robe, did he ever think that his official seal had her blood on it? Jiang Quan was such a person. For Jiang Su, for Jiang Chao, for Xia Yan, for himself, he had treated her, Zhao Mei, and the entire Zhao family as paving stones. In both her previous and current life, had he ever treated them as his real family? In her previous life, when she had been imprisoned, she had only been at a loss and despair. Now that she had met an old friend again, there was only hatred. Hatred, how could she not hate? Being made into a human swine by Jiang Su, unable to move, and seeing her own young son being played with by a powerful official with her own eyes, who could understand this kind of heartrending pain? Hearing the news of her family being executed with her own ears, yet having no one to turn to for help, how could she explain the grief and indignation? Since hell did not accept people like her, she had returned to the human world. If she did not let these people have a taste of hell, how could she be satisfied? From the moment of her rebirth, she had already abandoned all kinship with Jiang Quan and wholeheartedly focused on vengeance. She widened her eyes slightly, her pair of fog-like eyes suddenly became clearer. Looking deeper, it was clear, like a clear spring flowing in the mountains, without the slightest impurity. The voice in front of her was as gentle as the wind, and she called out again, "Father." In a flash, Jiang Quan regained his senses. His eldest daughter's smile was bright and beautiful, but for no reason, it made people feel uneasy. He glanced at Jiang Wan and said, "It's good that you're back." After that, he did not express anything else. His coldness made Lian Xiao and Bai Ji, who were behind him, feel somewhat indignant. Jiang Wan did not seem to notice, and smiled at Jiang Chao, who was beside her, second brother. Jiang Chao was still the same as he was in her memory, with a sunny and cheerful appearance. He scratched his head uneasily, and answered with a smile, "Wan Mimi." However, there was a trace of unclear meaning in his eyes. Both of Xia Yan's children were people who knew how to wear a mask. After Jiang Xing's death, this second brother of hers was extremely good to her. Jiang Chao seemed to have an amiable and upright personality, but occasionally, he would act foolishly and suffer losses. With such a personality, anyone would be willing to befriend him, especially Jiang Wan, who had lost Jiang Xing. She could also find the warmth she had lost from this second brother of hers. However, in reality, this foolish and upright youth had ultimately married the beloved daughter of the current prime minister. Since then, the prime minister had become part of the 8th prince's faction. Now that she thought about it, everything from her previous life had become a mirage. Her impression of Jiang Chao remained the same as in her previous life, when he had attempted to use her beauty to become a bargaining chip in the bureaucracy. In the end, she had entered the palace, and this good brother of hers had played a part in it. She still remembered his solemn promise, "Mimi is such a heavenly beauty, after entering the palace, you will certainly be favored by the emperor." This kind of riches and honor that splashes the heavens is Mimi's good fortune. Chapter 49. Jiang Chao was dressed in a long, indigo robe embroidered with gold, which made his usually high-spirited expression appear more steady, and he also had a trace of the aura of nobility. Although his speech and mannerisms were deliberately concealed, he still had the style of an official. In Jiang Ruan's eyes, this was shameful, but in the eyes of the old Jiang madam, she was extremely satisfied. On her stern face, there was also a trace of an affectionate smile. "Chao will be participating in the examinations after the new year. What did the Imperial College say?" Jiang Chao's face revealed a big smile, but he did his best to suppress it as he said, "They did not say anything. There should not be a problem with passing the first place." Jiang Quan glanced at Jiang Chao, "I just do not know what the ranking is. In any case, what needs to be done has already been done." Second Yin Yang's eyes flashed, and she covered her mouth as she laughed. "That is really good, for its 2 children both know how to write articles. This time, second young master will certainly strive for a scholarly title. From what I can see, he will definitely be a Zhuangyuan." Although second Yin Yang did not like Xia Yan, Jiang Quan still had to put up a good front in the Fu. Moreover, if he were to flatter Jiang Chao, the old Jiang madam would also be happy. Sure enough, the old Jiang madam said, "Silly, such words cannot be spoken carelessly." On her face, there was still no hint of reproach, and she was all smiles. Jiang Chao also laughed, and Xia Yan nudged Jiang Quan. Everyone in the room began to laugh, truly like a harmonious and affectionate family. Just as everyone's atmosphere was harmonious, an abrupt voice interrupted, "What is everyone talking about? Why are you all laughing so happily?" Jiang Wan slightly raised her lips. Jiang Wan slightly raised her lips as a beautiful matron leisurely walked in from outside the door. Compared to Xia Yan and the other Yinyangs, she appeared to be extremely young. She was dressed in an artemisia green brocade robe with fine cloud and goose feathers, and a misty cloud butterfly skirt. Her hair was combed into a 100-flower bun. There was no hairpin inserted into the bun, only a pale yellow plum flower. As she walked in, she had a light smile on her face. She had a kind of beauty that was like falling smoke. Unexpectedly, she had a delicateness that ordinary madams of official families did not possess. There was not the slightest trace of pretentiousness. It was as if the frailty was carved into her bones. This was the 5th Yin Yang, Hong Ying. Jiang Quan was a rather reputable person. Disregarding all obstructions, he had forcibly redeemed this Qin Yin Yang from the brothel. At first, he had wanted to gift her to his superiors, but in the end, she had become the 5th Yin Yang of the Fu. This had damaged Jiang Quan's reputation. At first it was said that Xia Yan had quarreled with him, but in the end, the matter was left unsettled. However, Hong Ying had ultimately caused a rift in the relationship between Jiang Quan and Xia Yan. Although this rift now seemed insignificant, it could be used well. In her previous life, when Jiang Wan had returned to the Jiangfu, Hong Ying had already reached the point where she could stand up to Xia Yan as an equal, and no one in the Fu dared to look down on her. Later on, because Xia Yan had become pregnant, Hong Ying had bribed the servants to cause Xia Yan to miscarry. In the end, no one knew how this matter had come to light. Jiang Quan was furious and had Hong Ying locked up, but Hong Ying had hanged herself. Now that she thought about it, even at that point, Jiang Quan had not beaten Hong Ying to death, but had instead locked her up. Presumably, he had also treated Hong Ying with some true feelings. As for Hong Ying hanging herself in the woodshed without rhyme or reason, one could not help but suspect that it was Xia Yan's handiwork. In her previous life, Jiang Wan had not had much contact with Hong Ying, because Xia Yan had detested Hong Ying to such an extent that she still did not know what kind of person she was. As soon as Hong Ying arrived, Jiang Quan's gaze fell on her. His face also became somewhat gentle as he said, "We are talking about Chao, Xia Yan's gaze was slightly sluggish, almost indiscernible, but Jiang Wan caught it. Xia Yan naturally had a strong scholarly air, but as a woman from a brothel, she naturally had a charm that a young lady from an official's family did not possess. This charm, for men, just so happened to be extremely attractive. Jiang Quan loved talented women, and Xia Yan was talented. Hong Ying was not bad either. She was proficient in the 4 arts of zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Although she was not as dignified as Xia Yan, she had seen many people in the brothel, and her experience had also grown. Thus, she knew better than Xia Yan what Jiang Quan liked to hear. In reality, ever since Hong Ying had entered the Jiang Fu, Xia Yan was no longer Jiang Quan's only understanding flower. Hong Ying slightly curtsied towards Jiang Chao. "I heard that second young master will be taking the imperial examinations in a few days. Xia wishes that second young master will pass the imperial examinations and seize the championship in one fell swoop." Jiang Chao's gaze towards Hong Ying was somewhat dark, but after hearing Hong Ying's words, he could not help but relax his brows. "Many thanks to Fifth Yin for your kind words." Jiang Su smiled as she walked to Jiang Quan's side. "Why are you all standing? Why don't we go to the hall? Mother has already prepared delicacies and is just waiting for father and older brother to join us." The old Jiang madam also clapped her hands. "Exactly, second girl is still the most considerate." Everyone in the house happily walked towards the hall. Jiang Wan watched them with cold eyes, and when Jiang Quan walked past, she softly said, "Why don't I see third younger sister?" Second Yang, who was standing to one side, paused, turned her head, and forced out a smile. "Third young miss is not feeling well today, and is resting in the room." "Has a doctor been invited?" Jiang Wan asked with concern. "If it is not a problem, send someone to call her. Today is father's return to the Fu." "Don't worry about it," Jiang Quan interrupted her coldly. "Let her rest for a few more days." Jiang Wan immediately fell silent, and second Yang fiercely twisted the handkerchief in her hand before slowly catching up to Jiang Quan, who was in front. Jiang Wan smiled faintly again. During the meal, everyone was in high spirits, but it was only on the surface. It was unknown what each of them was plotting. After the meal, Jiang Quan did not go to Yan Huayuan, but to Hong Ying's courtyard. Second Yang was naturally indignant, and after cursing him as a vixen, she left. However, Xia Yan gently sent him off, and did not seem to be unhappy at all. At night, when this matter was brought up in the courtyard, Lian Xiao even said, "Furen is really amazing. Master has just returned to the Fu, and immediately went to Fifth Yang's courtyard, and she can still smile." Baiji glared at her. "What nonsense are you talking about? Did I say anything wrong?" Lian Xiao had always been a straightforward person, and she did not conceal her dislike of Xia Yan. "I just don't believe that she is really so happy in her heart." Lu Zhu squatted on the ground and fiddled with the charcoal in the brazier. She raised her head and blinked. "Of course it's for second young master. Doesn't Furen want second young master to take the examinations? Miss, do you think that second young master will pass this time?" Jiang Wan did not read as she usually did. Ever since she returned, she had been sitting at the table in front of the teapot, thinking about something. When she heard this, she smiled faintly. "Second brother has a good memory, and he has been extraordinarily intelligent since he was young. Father has personally taught him since he was young, and he has taken care of everything. He should pass the examinations. Isn't that bad?" Lian Xiao was greatly alarmed, if second young master really passes the examinations, Yan Hua Yuan will look down on this place even more. Old Furen will probably side with second young master. What's there to be afraid of? I'll just say that it should be. I'll say that second young master will definitely not pass the examinations, Jiang Ruan said faintly. In his previous life, Jiang Chao had indeed passed the examinations. Although he was not the Zhuangyuan, he was a solid Tanhua Lang. At that time, he was flushed with success, and the emperor had personally conferred him the title. The Jiang Fu's name had spread throughout the capital, and he had also gained the favor of the prime minister's daughter. Fame, fortune, and beauty were all perfect. But how could she let him have his wish in this life? In just a few short days, she had to teach him a taste of falling from the clouds. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.